2018 was the beginning. From podcasts to live events, Fight Night Picks was off and running.
Do you typically train for a fight with a specific game plan in mind, or do you train for a certain opponent?
Honest to God, I always have the same game plan.
A year later, a new ad.
The cringe fest continues with Henry Cejudo. He pulled out a snake today. Old clip.
Since then, it's been a wild ride. 2022 shaping up to be another crazy year.
Hurt Chandler. He might be peacocking right now. I think that left hook hurt.
Oh, big time right hands, Michael Chandler.
Oh, they've both been hurt this week.
Oh!
So as they say, let's get into it.
And great to be back. I can't wait to start 2022 off on the right foot. Thanks so much for joining in with Fight Night Picks. As always, one half your hosting duo, Craig Allen. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Craig Allen FNP. With me to my left, to your right, Matt Allen on the respective socials, Matt Allen FNP. We make it very easy. And listen, 2021 was an absolutely insane year for Fight Night Picks. The previews, the predictions, episodes of This Week in MMA, early stoppage, the fight companions, and, of course, that signature marquee question mark kicks 2 hours before the prelims. We were even able to hit up a live event. Just one, but Fight League Atlantic here in Atlanta, Canada. I can't wait for this year, and we have so many good fights coming up. Late winter, early spring, it's shaping up to be an awesome one. Matt, what are you looking forward to most coming up this year?
Well, personally, I wish I was a little bit taller. I wish I was a ball. No, I'm kidding. I can't let you get 4 Fight Night Picks prediction awards in a row. I just can't let it happen. I got close last year. I was in the lead. I may have choked a little bit at the end of the year. I can admit that. But I'm feeling good at the start of 2022. I feel like this year is going to be my year. But I guess more of a note on the channel, I think we can hit 50,000 subscribers by the end of the year. I know it's a long shot, but just like Napoleon's uncle in that movie Napoleon Dynamite, I think we can get the pigskin over those mountains. Here's the thing. If we can collab with other people, which I think we can do more of this year, if we can just keep up this content, I think we can get to that lofty goal, but we're going to need your guys' help to do it.
We've already got a big time collab coming up next week on another person's channel, so check out all that stuff. You can find it on the socials, as we already mentioned, and I absolutely can't wait for it. Again, it is such an interesting time to be an MMA fan. You've got Gon and Ngannou, you've got featherweight division that's in flux, and
more expensive pay-per-view.
Well, there's that too, but you might find out a little bit more about the division with this weekend's main event. And if you're a big fan of Fight Night Picks, you know that you can find us all over the place. We're always putting in the work. So if there's any fights that are added, any that fall out, you can check in here on the channel. We update as fast as humanly possible. But again, if you are a true blue Fight Night Picks fan, you've been subscribed for a very long time, you know that the way that we start off these full card videos, we throw it on over to our Fight of the Night screen. Pick 2 contenders that could be the most exciting fights coming up on this weekend that are deserving of some of that bonus cash. Let's throw it on over to the Fight of the Night screen, as always presented by Manscaped. Check them out, manscaped.com. Use the promo code FNP. You're going to get 20% off and free shipping. Let's throw it on over to the Fight of the Night screen.
Let us know down below in the comments section who you've got. It's time for the Fight of the Night with Fight Night Picks.
An absolute bonker banger. We have Raw Dog, Brandon Royval, and he likes it raw. Shimmy, 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 and shimmy, and across the cage against Rogerio Bontorin, who gets this shot back at flyweight after missing weight in a short notice draw at bantamweight against Matt Schnell, where he looked pretty good in that fight. But if you know anything about Rogerio Bontorin, or even Brandon Royval for that matter, go back and watch their respective fights with Kai Kara-France. If you know what these guys can bring to the table, it's absolute masterclasses in awesomeness. And listen, Matt, I used about every cliche I could, but I can't wait for this fight.
This should be a very, very fun fight because both guys can get it done everywhere. How many fights are there where we say, hey, if it stays in the feet, this should be a great fight, but one fighter's lacking in one area where the other might have a strength. Both these fighters are so well-rounded that I think it's going to be a phenomenal fight no matter where it takes place, be it in the clinch, on the feet, or on the ground. That's how high level I think both these guys are. So I really do think this could be the fight that sort of steals the weekend.
And with our second pick, I mean, a little bit of behind the scenes. We're Saturday, January 8th as we tape this. We're going to be putting it out on Sunday the 9th ahead of the card that's on the 15th. I threw a tweet out there tonight saying that, listen, Joanderson Brito, if you don't know him, he's going to become your favorite fighter's favorite fighter in 2022. This guy has an absolute wild style, and he's taking on Bill Algeo, who, in my mind's eye, I think he's deserving of being or at least fighting top 15 talent, but it's been 1-2 so far in the UFC with a debut of a Fight of the Night against Ricardo Lamas. This should be An absolutely insane fight if the pace goes at what I think it's probably going to go at.
I agree 100%. If we get the best version of this fight, it could be fight of the year. And if we get the worst version of this fight, it could be fight of the night. Like, those are my expectations for these guys come this weekend. But you're 100% right. Algeo, or at least the best version of what he could become, is a potential top 15 guy. Like, a very, very fun fighter. But we've seen not even lapses in concentration. We've just seen a very up and down game out of him in the UFC so far. But I think this is one of those fights that if he's not on or at his best for, he's going to get knocked out in spectacular fashion. So I think this fight's going to be phenomenal.
Joanderson, Brito, go back and watch some of his fights or watch the preview that we have coming up later on in the show. As always, our Fight of the Night screen presented by Manscaped. Check them out. Manscaped.com. Use promo code FNP for 20% off and free shipping. So as we said off the hop, if there's any changes, if any fights are added or subtracted, because as you know, Muslim Salikov out of his fight with Michel Pereira, that was supposed to be the co-main event coming up this weekend. We also had Kledson Rodriguez, who's supposed to make his UFC debut, take on Zarukadashev. That fight's off. Joaquin Buckley was supposed to fight Abdulrazak Al-Hassan, but not all is lost. We have some big-time fights coming up on this card, and if you don't believe me, Katlyn Chookagian taking on Jennifer Maia. The last time they fought, it was a title eliminator, UFC 244. You get Calvin Kattar taking on Giga Chikadze, and ostensibly, with Max Holloway out of his fight against Alexander Volkanovski, if it was real, and the Korean Zombie, is he going to fight? Isn't he going to fight? Maybe one of these guys with an impressive win could kind of vault themselves into that conversation of a title shot. So I can't wait for the card coming up this weekend.
I think it's going to be a great card to kick off 2022. Is it the deepest card, or is it the deepest fight night card ever? No, not at all. But it's got a great main event. It's got great prospects, like you said. It's some great fight of the night caliber fights. So I think this is going to be a phenomenal event to kick off 2022.
Make sure you check out some of our sponsors. Manscaped out there at manscaped.com. Promo code FNP, 20% off and free shipping. You know the drill if you haven't checked it out already. You can get some of the merch on our site. It's fightnightpicks.com. All sorts of great stuff over there. I absolutely can't wait for this card. I'm beyond excited. It's the return of the fights. So as we always say, Matt, with Fight Night Picks, let's get into it. At a combined age of 70, with 23 pro fights between them, the UFC has marketed this fight as strawweight prospects battling it out. We have Vanessa Demopoulos, the little monster, taking on Silvana Gomez Juarez, La Malvada. And Matt, when I was getting ready for their respective UFC debuts, yes, they were both on incredibly short notice. For Gomez Juarez, she was supposed to compete on Dana White's Contender Series. She gets the call. She takes on Lupita Godinez. For Vanessa Demopoulos, she's supposed to be taking a fight with LFA. She gets a short notice call up a weight class against JJ Aldrich. And it wasn't a very favorable matchup for Demopoulos. Same thing could be said for Silvana Gomez Juarez, because if you look at Gomez Juarez's technique and her style, it's very reminiscent of a lot of her training partners and the people that she works with over at Entram Gym. You've got Marcelo Rojo, you've got Brandon Moreno, you have so many good fighters that are pressure fighters, very aggressive with the striking, very good head movement, technical boxing. And for Gomez Juarez, I thought we were going to get that in the debut against Godinez, but she got backed up, she ate the straight shots, she got taken down with ease. And for Demopoulos, she has such a good ground game, and I'll break it down into the nuts and bolts and the pedigree that she has in her grappling, but she had recently switched gyms. She had been working with Fight Ready, Eddie Cha, Santino DeFranco, and again, I can go on and on. Zhang Wei Li's training there, of all people, with Henry Cejudo and Devison Figueiredo. But for Demopoulos, it was kind of like the Keith Richards riff. And she just couldn't get started up. And after the first round, where there was a little bit of striking, it was just JJ Aldrich, who ended up winning that fight by all three judges' accounts, 30-27. So a bit of a disappointing start for both of these women in the UFC, looking to right the ship, looking to earn some wins in their career. And the thing that's a little bit disappointing to some of the fans, too, is if you look at the 5 on in, 3-2 for Silvana Gomez Juarez, and for Vanessa Demopoulos, 2-3, albeit against a good level of competition. And for Gomez Juarez, you look at it, I mean, she fought Vanessa Mello outside of the UFC, you know, the bantamweight that had a hard time making bantamweight. She lost Ariane Lipski with KSW for the belt, you know, sometimes the queen of violence, sometimes not. So
often not.
For both of these women, very, very differing skill sets. It is a clash of styles, but I look at this fight and I know you have something to say and I feel the same way.
We've sold enough Wolf tickets on both these fighters to sell out like Wembley Stadium. Like, Anthony Joshua has sold less tickets lifetime than the Wolf tickets we've sold on these two fighters' skill sets, because I agree with everything you said. but you really have to water it down quite a bit. And I don't say that to be rude to either one of these fighters, but it's very similar to what the NBA is going through right now, with a lot of players just not being able to play and finding replacement players to just put in their spot. Like, we were joking around about Lance Stevenson coming back and playing for the Indiana Pacers. Yeah, he looked really good. It's funny to see him do the air guitar again. Oh, it's funny. Like, I remember being a hardcore fan in the early 2010s. It's great to see those players come back. But they're replacement players for a reason. There's a reason they're not out there every single game and every single day. There's a reason Gomez Juarez got her call up to the UFC at 36 years of age in the strawweight division. And same thing with Demopoulos. Like, we talk about her grappling, but when you get beat that soundly by somebody like JJ Aldrich, who isn't a fighter that we ever talk about as being someone who will ever reach the top 15, that's when I start to not really look at you through that prospect scope anymore. You can either one day become a Jeff Hardy, or you're just Paul London for your whole career. That's what it is. They might have very similar skill sets, but one is much more memorable than the other.
What if Brian Kendrick's watching this?
Brian Kendrick's had that little run. I forget who his manager was, but he had a run. I think he was Intercontinental Champion at one point. Either way, I don't think when we're talking about this fight, we're talking about two people who are going to go on and have, like, I don't know, like Jan Blachowicz-esque runs at any point where they're going to figure it out later on in their careers. I agree with what you said. It very much is a clash of styles, to where if Gomez Juarez is her best version, and I do like what you said, because in her last performance, we didn't see the fighter we saw pre-UFC at all. She was that technical boxer who really did have that in-tram gym sort of background. You looked at her, it was a very stalking forward type of a game where she would go to the body, it would open up her headshots, and she has great boxing combinations. But then you get to the big show and we don't see any of that. So I'm just really concerned to see someone like Juarez fighting a similar matchup to her last opponent. I know Godinez is probably a more refined and honestly a better version of Demopoulos. They do a lot of similar things, although Demopoulos does have that win on her record. I just feel like at this stage of their career, Godinez is a little bit more complete of a fighter. That's why I see Demopoulos winning this matchup based on the style, but I just don't know what they do with Demopoulos after this, because I still don't think getting a win over Gomez Juarez then sets you up for great things in this division.
Well, and it's a really tricky one. I mean, for Gomez Juarez, she actually trains with one of Combate's biggest and brightest young stars, and I want to make sure that I get it right. It's Yasmin Haraji, and she's such a great fighter over there. Just won a Combate tournament here recently in the past year, or this past summer. Somebody really good to lean on, kind of work your complete game. And if you look at it for Demopoulos, I mean, again, very high level competition all the way up through the loss to Corey McKenna, who just had a fight booked against Elise Reed that I noticed on Marcel Dorf's Instagram. Wow. She had the loss to Lupita Godinez after that. She beat Cynthia Arceo, which was a really, really impressive fight. And then she ends up against JJ Aldrich. Again,
the Arceo performance, sorry to cut you off, was very similar though to when Cheyenne Bays landed that head kick, like 2 fights. It was one of those, like, I'm going to throw really hard early on, and thank God I landed.
But when you do look at it and you boil it down, again, two very differing styles. For Vanessa Demopoulos, 2-time Pan American grappling champion. She's a BJJ champ, the world over, 7-time national champ, 5-time world champ, brown belt in BJJ. And again, the refinements and the different things that you're going to be able to add to your game by going to Fight Ready, working with somebody like, maybe it's a Tracy Cortez, maybe it's Zhang Wei Li in your own division. It could be anybody over there. There's so many names that are moving to Arizona to train right now. And for Gomez Juarez, I look at it, very, very aggressive, very good technique when things are on. And I mean, you look at it, the fight against Lipski, it was Queen of Violence. There was a very swollen eye, and it was the Argentinian's eye in that fight. But I go down and I look through it. She did struggle quite a bit against Godinez in the striking. But it's a problem that I'm going to bring up, especially for Slava Borshchev, who's also on this card. You see some of these strikers coming into the UFC, and as soon as somebody tries to pressure up on them and their primary strikers, the guard goes way up, and all of a sudden the takedown's available. So if I look at the odds for this one, the odds opened with Gomez Juarez a minus 130 favorite. She's a plus 108 right now. If you look at it for Demopoulos, open a plus 110. She's a minus 131. If we have a look at the Tapology votes, they're surprised to us, they are to you. I'm going to set the over-under, Matt, at 70% for Demopoulos. What would you say?
I think they'll be under. I think they'll be close to par.
Matt's thinking under. Ooh. So, 1,254 total votes. 68% with Juarez. 81% have her to win by decision. For the 32% that I have Demopoulos, 72% by decision. So, all of a sudden, we have a fight where the underdog has more votes on Tapology. And listen, take Tapology votes and even the odds with a grain of salt. We're doing this for fun, making a pick for this fight because, listen, this is as tricky as it gets. You have a 6-4 fighter at 33 taking on a 10-3 fighter at 37, a recently turned 37. So, again, when it goes bad for either of these fighters, it goes really bad. It's like watching Terrence Ross try to play defense for the Orlando Magic, or Sadiq Bey with the Detroit Pistons. It's
He's having
so
a good
bad.
year, actually.
Yeah, but he's terrible at defense. Look at the metrics.
Craig,
But when it's
don't
going,
act like you watch advanced NBA metrics all of a sudden.
when it's going so good, it's like watching DeMar DeRozan with the Bulls. And listen, rose-colored lenses for Raptors fans. You're watching these two guys that were supposed to be able to do it all with the Raptors. And I look at this fight, for Vanessa Demopoulos, she's inverted triangling people like she's, who? Name your fighter. Vanessa Demopoulos. It's like looking at the NBA crest and you go Jerry West. I look
You're
at an
forcing
inverted
it, Craig.
triangle
Come on.
and I look at Vanessa Demopoulos. But again, when it's going so well for her, her grappling's on point. She can strike to get the takedown, and her takedown attempts are a little wonky. Silvana Gomez Juarez, when her striking's on, it's on, and she looks absolutely amazing. But when it's off, it's off. So Matt, when you're looking at this fight, you're making the final pick. I know you kind of tipped your hand, but what are you saying here?
This isn't going to be, like, there's a reason this didn't come to either one of our minds, so we made the fight of the night screen, you know? Neither one of us were like, hey, Gomez Juarez, Demopoulos, maybe that. Here's my prediction on the fight. I think Gomez Juarez could score like a weird TKO early, similar to like Amanda Lemos when she fought Luis Canello or Montserrat Canello. It was that weird quick stoppage where it was like an early shot. It was kind of weird. Was it early? Was it not? I could see her getting a win like that. But it's very hard for me to predict you to getting like a 10-second knockout victory based on your opponent's just ill-advised forward pressure. Now, I could see that exact situation happening, don't get me wrong, but I do think Demopoulos is at least the more consistent fighter throughout the 3 rounds. And if she can push back Gomez Juarez, similar to what Lupita Godinez was able to do against her, I think Demopoulos can have similar levels of success. Now, again, I think I set this up well earlier on in the video. I don't think Demopoulos gets this win and then goes on to call out like anybody good in this division and then go on and get like marquee wins.
It's Angela Hill next if you win.
Even that, I was going to say that name, but I think Angela Hill's a step too far. I really do. I think for Demopoulos, she needs a lot more time to progress her skills. And this is the problem that the UFC has, the Bellator doesn't. You kind of have to fight really good competition right away because they don't have any 0-1 fighters on their roster. So it's just, you hit the ground running. I think Demopoulos will get the win, but I do have some hesitations about her in the future.
To me, I watched, Gomez Juarez, and listen, Godinez beat both of these women. She beat one more handily than the other. And if you look at it in that fight for Gomez Juarez, we're striking a little bit, and then all of a sudden Godinez gets a takedown, and we're on the mat for about 2.5 minutes. And then Gomez Juarez pops back up. She gets hit a few more times, lands a nice right cross of her own, gets taken down, and then once she's down, she turns into an armbar. So it was one of those ones where the commentary team said, oh, she's got to turn. Oh no, she's turning the wrong way. Oh no, it's a submission. For me, I'm going with Demopoulos in this fight. But again, if you can make a very good case for the technical striker in Argentina, Silvana Gomez Juarez, I'm definitely here to listen to it. I don't feel overly strongly about either of these fighters in this one. It's a fun one. I'm going to enjoy it. Both of us in this fight going with America's stripper Bible author from 2017, Vanessa Demopoulos, to get the win. We got a big time slate of fights coming up this weekend on Saturday, and you can check us out on Question Mark Kicks 2 hours before the card. You're not going to want to miss it. So as we always say with Fight Night Picks, let's get into it. Big time fight coming up this weekend at Bantamweight. We have a battle of the coast as it's Long Island MMA zone. Brian Kelleher, 35 fight veteran in MMA, and he's 35 years old. He's taking on the 11-fight stud Saidyokub Kakhramonov, coming at you from Oyama's in California. And for Kakhramonov, I think we gave him his flowers in his UFC debut. He's coming in on short notice, taking on Trevin Jones. Now, I wrote it down, but I had it committed to memory, so it's kind of weird. But Trevin Jones had 4 fights fall out before finally somebody signed the contract and showed up to make it into the octagon. Mana Martinez was one of those guys. Aaron Phillips was one of those guys. I mean, listen, now I'm writing it down. Ronnie Lawrence was another, and Tony Kelly, who apparently can drive almost a day for a fight and then win.
I'd be so stiff. I don't know about you.
He beat Randy Costa. Crazy stuff. Read about it. But for this fight, and for that one as well, I couldn't have been more pleased to see Saidyokub Kakhramonov in the UFC, and the hype started to build for me when I watched him in his special one-off, this is a prospect fight over with the PFL. He took on Umar Nurmagomedov. You know that guy. He's had one UFC fight. It was pretty fun to watch, really. He's a stud himself. And in that fight, Kakhramonov kind of was able to withstand it. I mean, working the takedowns, defending the takedowns. They both struck against one another. And listen, you watch Nurmagomedov, he's got those long-range prodding kicks that he throws to the head, into the body, to the legs. He's a very fun fighter. But for Kakhramonov at that time, under 25 years of age, He looked wise beyond his years in the octagon. So when I look at that fight, then I look at his fight against Trevin Jones, where in the first round, Jones, you want to wrestle me a little bit? I'm going to wrestle you. And then continue on through that fight until he finished it in the third round. It was one of the most impressive debuts that we had last year. And nobody really talked about it.
No, they didn't, and I can call myself out because I didn't think he had a great shot in that fight. And oh wow, what a surprise! Trevin Jones, was out there knocking people dead and finishing fights left, right, and center. So I was pretty confident he was going to have another impressive performance. But that's why I was so impressed with Kakhramonov. If you go out there and beat a guy on short notice and finish him in the third round, after it wasn't just like, oh, he got lucky and finished him in the third round. Like, very competitive fight, back and forth. He's like learning as the fight goes on, which is, I think, a very big key in this matchup. And then he gets the finish. It was as impressive as you can look in your debut because he not only faced adversity, came back from it and got the finish win near the end. So it wasn't just one of those, it was kind of like, I can't think of another good example, oddly enough, but you know, there's always those fights where it's very one-sided and you just go, it'd be nice if that fighter got the finish. Saidyokub Kakhramonov, I think I got that right for once, didn't find himself in that position. He could actually go home and say like, hey, I got the finish, everything was perfect. This is a really weird fight though, because I feel like the consensus on at least social media is that Brian Kelleher has zero chance in this fight. I haven't seen a lot of people giving Kelleher a big opportunity, but I think they're doing themselves a huge disservice because Kelleher is one of those fighters where if he's 25, if he's 35, if he's had 50 fights in the UFC, or if he's only had 5, you're probably going to get the same version of him each and every time out. And the thing I really like about Kelleher is that even if you look through all of his wins and all of his losses, he's not a guy who gets finished all that often. Like, he is tougher than a $2 steak. Yes, he has some deficiencies with his grappling. He's one of those guys who offensively with his chokes, he is lights out, but defensively sometimes with the upper echelon wrestlers, he sort of finds himself a step behind especially. But when you put his whole package together, Kelleher is, and I would put this across any division in the UFC, he's one of the best litmus tests for just young up and coming guys, because I think if you beat Kelleher, you're probably not a top 15 guy yet, you're probably like a top 20, 21 guy, but it definitely tells me that you have a promising future, and that's why I think this fight's going to be so good, because for Kakhramonov, it was on short notice, like you said. Jones had a lot of different opponents sort of show up and fall out, so okay, maybe it was a weird fight for both guys. If he goes out there and beats Brian Kelleher in a similar fashion to how he won his last fight, there's zero question marks. It is top 15 or bust for this guy.
Well, and that's the thing. For Kakhramonov, you're on the fast track if you win this fight. You beat Jones, you beat Kelleher, the world's your oyster, and if you look at it at 135 and you want to focus in on Kelleher, he's kind of like the next generation Nick Lentz, but he's not because they're almost the same age. And you look at the level of competition that Brian Kelleher has faced. I mean, 2 wins over Julio Arce outside of the UFC. He's fought Jimmy Rivera. He's fought a very, very high level. And in the UFC, 2 fight of the night bonuses, 1 against Damian Stasiak, 1 against Hunter Azure, where Azure's absolutely kicking the crap out of him in the first round. Kelleher comes back in the second. Azure's tired. And then the performance bonuses that he has. 1 over Alcantara. That was his UFC debut. 1 over Ode Osborne. And then another one over Rodriguez. And if you look at it for Kelleher, and I give him that Nick Lentz comp because he's one of those guys, at any time, if your head's poked out there, he can jump guillotine like the best of them, and that is his signature choke, and you have to watch out for it, especially if you're Kakhramonov and you're working it up against the fence. You're going for that deep double leg. And the worst thing that you can see people do, and it rarely ever works in high-level MMA, is when somebody has their legs spread out as far as they can, you have somebody trying to clasp 2 arms, and then they stick their head out. It is finish city, whether it's Ryan Spann against Johnny Walker or anybody else, whether it's a smaller fighter and they get submitted. It's one of those things that you have to worry about. And for Kakhramonov, hopefully the team at Oyama, hopefully Luis Smolk is able to help him out with some of that grappling. Maybe even future title challenger Carla Esparza over at the gym. But when I look at this fight and I look at the odds, Kelleher open a plus 145. He's plus 133 right now. For Kakhramonov, the comeback, open to minus 170. He's minus 161. And I mean, this is one of the fights that I'm most interested about because is it Brian Kelleher just doing the old veteran thing, grinding out another win? Or, again, is this a springboard for Kakhramonov? The votes are over on Tapology. Surprise to us, they are to you. You seem to think that social media was all over Kakhramonov, so I'll set the over-under at 70% for Kakhramonov. What would you say?
I think it's going to be over. I really do.
Ooh, it's close. 1,337 total votes. 69% with Kakhramonov. On that, 55% by decision, 25% by submission, 12% by knockout. For the 31% that have Kelleher, 50% by decision, 23% by knockout, 14% by submission. Don't check my math. I'm just reading. But when I look at this fight, yeah, I mean, Kakhramonov can seemingly do it all. He's very much a Swiss Army knife. And you look at it for Kelleher, again, the same thing could be said. Is he the most volume-heavy striker? Not so much. But the trouble that I have with this fight is the fact that for Kakhramonov, you look at the losses. Nurmagomedov by decision, close competitive fight. Nurmagomedov definitely won, but I'm fine with that.
It was very similar to Arman Zarukian versus Islam Makhachev.
Yeah, it's a learning experience, if anything. He gets knocked out by Pipe Vargas, and that's, it's a cause for concern, but Vargas is a very good fighter. He knocks out Askar that was supposed to be in the UFC last year against Cody Stamen. That fight didn't happen. Tyson Lin, if you look at his record, 6-4 on the paper, but he fought a very high-level competition before he fought Saidyokub Kakhramonov, and then, again, that Trevin Jones fight. So, for me, I look at this one. I'm very interested to see what I get out of both of these fighters. So, what's the pick here?
How about Tyson Lin's the guy I'm using to boost a guy's resume?
Tyson Lin, out of his losses, he lost to Sean O'Malley, Journey Newsom, Luis Smolka. Those were some of the losses before he fought Kakhramonov.
But out of all of his wins, I would be like, he's the guy who I'm really going to use to boost up his resume. This is the weird thing about this fight. I think this could be the most boring fight on the whole entire card. I know that's a weird thing to say based on the two fighters who are in it. Because I could see one version of this fight where Kakhramonov gets tagged early and he's just trying to fight on the outside for the remainder of it. Because he understands, like we had said, Kelleher has very specific danger zones in his fights. So I could see this being one of those situations where Kakhramonov is the more steady fighter. He's winning most of the moments throughout the fight. But Kelleher might have a few big moments in each round where he might land a big shot. He might himself even be able to secure a takedown. Just do something big enough that stands out in your mind. I don't think that's going to happen, though. I do think Kakhramonov is the much more clean fighter with his technique. I like the way that he goes down the middle with a lot of his strikes. He throws a nice front kick, too, that I think is going to give Kelleher a lot of trouble. But, and like you said, if Kelleher wins, it's going to be by finish. He's going to land a wild hook on the feet, get on Kakhramonov's back, choke him out, or get a guillotine in the first round. It's going to be wild if he does get the win, because it will be one of those, star-making, submissions. But I really do like Kakhramonov in this matchup. He's the much younger fighter who is very well-rounded, who's shown the ability to have really good cardio, too. That would be the only thing that would make me hesitant about this pick. If I was worried about Kakhramonov really slowing down in that third round, because we all know how steady Kelleher can be throughout his fights, but I don't have that worry whatsoever.
Well, for Saidyokub Kakhramonov, short notice against Trevin Jones. On a week's notice, he comes in and weighs over. So you hate to see that. For Brian Kelleher, if you want the comeback, his last fight over Domingo Plarte, all three judges scoring at 30-27 in that fight. 12 minutes and 49 seconds of control time, and 236 of 277 was his total strike clip. And in the bantamweight division, overall, these are all-time numbers. He's tied for 9th all-time in control time percentage at 38.8%. He's tied for 9th all-time in top position at 28.9%. So Brian Kelleher, you can't sleep on him. I'm not sleeping on him. I'm picking Saidyokub Kakhramonov, but you can't sleep on Brian Kelleher. I do see this fight as close as it is lined. No strong feelings either way, but I really, really do like Saidyokub Kakhramonov as a good prospect to keep going through this division. But again, for Kelleher, here's the big, watch out. Cody Stamen had a performance of a lifetime when he fought Brian Kelleher. And if you look at it for Ricky Simone, he also had a great time out, and a guy that's trained a little bit at Oyama's in the past. Both of those guys in that fight use very good boxing mixed in with the takedowns. That's what I think Saidyokub brings into this fight, and that's why I'm going with him here.
No, I agree 100%.
Big time fight coming up in the bantamweight division. Will the old man, will the veteran, will Brian Kelleher be able to get the win? Both of us going with Uzbekistan's Saidyokub Kakhramonov to get the win. You let us know down below in the comment section who you have. We got a big time fight card coming up this weekend, headlined by Calvin Kattar taking on Giga Chikadze. You're not going to want to miss, so keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Hopefully you had a very good holiday season. If not, we're here to cheer you up. As always, one half your host, Craig Allen. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Craig Allen FNP. With me to my left, to your right, Matt Allen on the respective socials. We make it so easy at Matt Allen FNP. And the reason why I say that is because whether it was good or whether it was bad, 2022 is the year of Slava Claus. We have the UFC debut of Russia's Viacheslav Borshchev, and I can't wait for it because, listen, 2021, we had some nice kickboxers come into the UFC. If you're a fan of Melzik Baghdasaryan, you can get excited for this fight. If you like Giga Chikadze, who's in our main event, then you're going to like Borshchev. He brings a very, very exciting style. He's a former K1 champ. He definitely has all that you want to see out of a striker. And oh, by the way, just made his way from Russia for fun to go to Team Alpha Male, stuck around on a P1 visa. Now he's working at the gym. He's training with the boys. And he's adding to his grappling with Uriah Faber, who has had a bad week. Now, when I look at this fight for Borshchev, an absolute pure striker at the highest level. And when he gets taken down, he can get himself into some sticky situations. But so far in his career, he's been able to pop back up to his feet for the most part. He's taking on Dakota Bush, a guy out of whether it's Westside MMA, whether it's the Pit MMA with Jake Collier, who I see in a lot of his Instagram posts, or Glory MMA and Fitness with a guy that trains at Westside, and TJ Brown, who's also on this card. Dakota Bush is one of those guys that it's balls to the wall. And for his nickname, it's Harry Balls. Well, it's just Harry. So you should expect that in his fights because this guy strikes with reckless abandon and he works the takedowns to great effect. I think we're going to get a very interesting fight and somewhat of a clash of styles here.
Is Dakota Bush the heir apparent to Clay Guida's throne of I'm always doing something? Because he does. You set it up perfectly. Like, he's just a very active fighter. No matter what it is in a fight, he's going to be doing something. And that is a great thing. Because how often do we say, oh, this fighter's very technical, they're very good, but they just don't have the activity to really go out there and take rounds from people. Like, Paul Felder kind of had that problem. Very technical fighter, had good but not great power, so he could get knockouts, but he didn't have the craziest level of volume. So if it did go to the scorecards, you'd always be kind of worried, because he'd land clean shots but not really knockout blows. Dakota Bush is not Paul Felder at striking, but he is always doing something, so they're kind of at the opposite end of that scale. I'm very interested to see the future for both of these guys moving forward, because with Slava Borshchev, I don't really know what his future is in the UFC and really in MMA, because you would kind of set it up, and I'll take it a step further. He's not just a pure striker. Like, he's just a striker and that's it. I don't think he even grapples that much in his spare time. Now, of course he does. But when you watch him in the cage, he very much is a kickboxer, just sort of transplanted into MMA rules. It is interesting to see because with some people, Alex Pereira now being in the UFC, you can get pretty far with that. Now, of course, he's arguably one of the best kickboxers like of our generation. He's been able to scale weight classes, so of course it's a little bit different. But there are some similarities in their styles because if you go back and watch some of Borshchev's fights, his takedown defense is non-existent, and he's very reactionary with a lot of what he does. He's not somebody who can kind of tell what his opponent's going to do in the grappling realm of things before they do it. It's something Dan Hardy always used to talk about. There's guys who are natural strikers, and there's guys who are natural grapplers. With Dan Hardy talking about himself, he said, okay, on the feet, I can just kind of flow. I don't need to think about what I'm doing. I've done it for so long. All that memory, it's almost in my nervous system, for instance. Like, it's that embedded into me. But with the grappling, it was okay. I was kind of a step behind. I'd have to think about what I was doing, and then I could set it up. With Borshchev, I think he is that point just blown up 1,000 times. Because with his striking, it is very pure. And if you do give him distance and just time to set everything up, you're going to get knocked out. He does one thing I really like before I pass it on to you. When you do pressure him, he doesn't deal well if you pressure him with your wrestling. But if you try to pressure him with your striking, he's really good at kicking out that lead leg to off-balance you. It's something Alexander Volkanovski does very well. Again, I'm using some examples from the best fighters in the UFC, but it's a great way to off-balance your opponent. And in Borshchev's last fight against Chris Duncan, who wasn't the best fighter in the world, if we're all being honest.
No, Chris Duncan's good.
He is, but I just didn't think he did enough when he got the top position. That's a story for another day. But anyways, what he was able to do with that knockout blow did show you sort of the best version of what Borshchev could be in the UFC. So I guess my question to you is, do you think he will be one of these Michael Oleksiejczuk fighters who we can sell the best version of him, and it's wow, this guy could be in the top 10, top 15, or do you think he could be the other side of that coin to where it is we could sell a great package on him, but there's a lot of detractors too?
This is what I have to say. It's very difficult to tell the ceiling on Borshchev. That's why it's tough to talk about this fight, because if you look at it for him, I gotta say this. He had 2 boxing fights. Pro in 2019, he won both of them. He was a K1 champion in 2010 and 2011. He had 18 pro wins in kickboxing out of 20 fights. He comes into MMA, and he fights 0-0 David Marquez. They're both making their pro debuts. He knocks him out in 55 seconds. That's pretty cool. So his next fight, he takes on 4-1 Ali Zebian. He beats him by decision. Ali Zebian's actually a pretty good fighter, and in that fight, again, Zebian will strike a little bit, and as soon as he strikes, Borshchev brings his guard way up, and all of a sudden, lower tier's totally exposed, and he gets taken down at will. Now, obviously, he wins that fight. He lands the cleaner, crisper shots, and for Zebian, he carries a lot of weight, and he really does tire out as the fights go on. So he wins that fight, takes on William Starks. That was a back and forth fight. I really did enjoy that one. Now, again, split decisions, call it what it is. I actually might be surprised if Fight Night Picks fans had it 29-28 for Starks and not for Borshchev.
I know who you're picking in this fight.
So that's a first. But when I look at that one, it was really tricky because Starks was able to control large amounts of time on the ground. And you hate to kind of see that when they strike. Obviously, Borshchev landed the cleaner, harder shots, but it was a bit of a back and forth. And again, I scored it for Starks. Then he takes on, and this is the worst part of it, Ali Zebian's a pretty good fighter. William Starks is a pretty good fighter too. So you have close fights with those two guys. They're both decisions. One you win unanimous, one you lose by split. Then he fights 2-2 Corey Delaney with Titan FC.
That was a mismatch.
And it's an absolute drop off a cliff in competition. And when you look at the fight, I gotta throw it up there. The Titan FC graphic for this one's a joke. They didn't even watch any tape on these guys because they said that Borshchev should take it to the ground just because he went to trains at Team Alpha Male. It's ridiculous. Pay attention. But when he takes on Corey Delaney, Delaney took that graphic to heart because they told him he should stand and strike. And what did Delaney do? He flopped around the octagon, chased him around, threw a bunch of shots, and then at the end of it, Borshchev finishes it on the ground and pound. So good win. So then he goes from there to taking on Kendley St. Louis, who's 3-3, but actually looked pretty good in that fight. He drops Borshchev with a right cross at one point, like face plants him off the canvas, and then Borshchev rallies back. And the good thing to see about that, and Paul Felder mentioned it in the lead into Borshchev's fight on Contender Series, was the fact that he's able to withstand some pressure and some adversity in these fights and fight back and come back to great effect. In that fight in the second round against Kendley St. Louis is gassed in the second round. Borshchev is too, to a certain degree, but he ends up getting the finish. And then against Chris Duncan, Duncan didn't really take advantage of the top pressure very well. I think he's a guy that you're going to see for a very long time. He had a lot of experience over with Bellator, one of Scotland's hottest prospects. Unfortunate that Paul Craig, is he retired? Maybe. I don't know. But in that fight, Borshchev looked great, and then that left hook knockout, man. That was disgusting. So we get this fight coming up here where we haven't talked a lot about Dakota Bush, and I'd like to because, again, training at the Pit, at Westside, at Glory MMA and Fitness, you absolutely love to see it. Training with guys, not just James Krause, but James Kelleher over there, as well as TJ Brown. And for Bush, pushes a crazy pace, takes guys down, unless you're Austin Hubbard, and we'll have to see how that factors in. He took that short notice fight, Matt, against Hubbard. He had a very close and competitive first round, but like his fight against Jalil Willis, a guy who can wrestle and is pretty good at 170, but when they fought, Willis missed weight, and in that one, Bush wins the first round, second round, third round, all Willis. Same thing in the Hubbard fight. So maybe that could happen, but Borshchev is not a fighter like Willis or like Hubbard.
But I think both these guys are kind of in the same boat cardio-wise, to where if they do fight a smart fight, then they can go 3 rounds. But if they fight their opponent's style of fight, then they will get tired. But both guys, the holes that both guys have in their game, the opponent can take advantage of. Because Dakota Bush, yes, he does do a lot on the feet, but he also leaves himself wide open on the feet when he does do a lot. It's kind of my Aljamain Sterling Piotr Jan point, to where if you're doing a lot, you're almost telling me more than I need to know. And that's my problem with Dakota Bush in this matchup. I think he could go out there and have one of those performances similar to Bilal Muhammad versus Diego Lima, to where he's taken down Borshchev, and although Borshchev in this situation might be the better striker, he's just always on the defense, and I think that might make Dakota Bush look really good. But this is my problem. Dakota Bush does get tired as the fight goes on, and this is what I worry about for both guys, honestly, in the third round. I think Borshchev's at least going to keep his power in the third round, to where if he hits Bush one time, he might be able to put him out with anything. He does have that kind of power. I worry about Bush's ability to go out there and just get a takedown in that third round when he does fatigue. Now, maybe he is able to do that, but I think that's going to be the tipping point of this fight. I think both guys are going to have their moments early. I think Bush might be able to get a takedown. Borshchev might be able to get back up to his feet. But I'm very, very curious to see how both these guys look in the later end of the second round, in the third round, because that's really going to be who's going to win the fight.
The odds on this one, the comeback for Slava Borshchev, open a plus 125 underdog. He's a minus 187 over on best fight odds. For Dakota Bush, open to minus 145. He is a plus 155, and if you want to have fun with it, Borshchev is the biggest mover and shaker on this card. The Tapology votes, surprise to us, they are to you. 1,290 total votes, 86% Borshchev, 71% by knockout, 14% that have Bush, 63% by decision. I am in the very small minority going with Dakota Bush in this fight because from Borshchev, I love the striking. People can call me a BGL, they can call me a hater, and haters will say that I don't know about Borshchev, but let me tell you this, pal. He looks great with Team Alpha Male, and if you've seen anything out of what the group, I guess you could say, over there has been able to do with Ricardo Ramos, man, that guy looks like a totally different fighter since he switched gyms, and he's added a little bit more to his ground game. Look at what he did to Bill Algeo. Wasn't even close with all the takedowns. Borshchev can definitely be there one day. I just don't think it's going to be his fight in this one. With the inexperience in just MMA, I think it's going to be one of those ones that Bush is going to be able to exploit here.
I think this is one-way traffic, one way or the other, so I feel like one of us is going to look stupid no matter what happens, because Bush is either going to go out there, wrestle his way to like a 30-25, and everybody's going to be like, oh, Slava Claus, go back to the North Pole, or Borshchev's going to knock him out with like a wild uppercut off a takedown attempt, and we're all going to be thinking, oh, well, maybe he should be like Santa Claus, not just Slava Claus. I'm going to pick Borshchev, though. I do like the fact that he does train with a primary group of wrestlers, and that is the one big thing that he has to fix. Here's the thing. If Borshchev had Chad Mendez's wrestling, he'd be so good. Like, he'd be one of the best fighters in the world, but that is such a big hole in his game. I do worry about his ability to get back up to his feet. I can admit that, and I do worry about his ability to defend the takedown, but like you had said, and like I'll echo, I like the fact that he is training with a lot of wrestlers, so hopefully he can land that one big shot.
We're split on the pick. Matt going with the former K1 world champ in Slava Claus, Slava Borshchev. I'm going with Dakota Bush in this fight with the wrestling, striking combination. Let us know down below in the comments section who you have between Bush and Borshchev. We get some big-time fights coming up on this card, including a big-time main event at 145 between Calvin Kattar and the man himself, Giga Chikadze. You're not going to want to miss. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. This is a fight I feel like I've seen 1,000 times. Coming up this weekend, a clash of styles. We have Mexico's Gabriel Benitez, a walking performance bonus, taking on downtown TJ Brown. And if your last name is Brown, I hate the nickname Downtown. Same. I think it's so played out. But we have TJ Brown, who looked really good on Dana White's Contender Series. I have to say that. He submitted Dylan Lockhart, a guy who I saw beat Jesse Erickson over in Lewiston, Maine, of all places, at the Androscoggin Bank Arena, you know, where the Lewiston Maniacs used to play. A lot of fun, but Lockhart looked amazing in that fight. For Jesse Erickson, he was on Man versus Bear. So that's where my weird MMA factoids and tidbits go, that when you go to watch fights like this with your friends, you can go, hey, my friend Craig Allen on Fight Night Picks told me that. And they'll go, what? Who? So, when we look at this fight, Gabriel Benitez, primary striker, and if there was a carbon copy of a fight that we need to see at 145, it's Charles Jourdain, who just re-signed with UFC today, and Gabriel Benitez.
Good call.
Both lefties, both love that whip and kick, throw it to the body, throw it to the head, throw it to the legs. And for Gabriel Benitez, I know that we say it, the broadcast says it, and Javier Mendez probably goes home and tells his kids about it, but Gabriel Benitez is one of the best kickers that's out there in MMA. That leg kick is so good, it's disgusting. And he's had fights where he's lost the skin off his shins because he's thrown so damn hard. He's had the old Luke Rockhold shin. But
here's the difference between him and Luke Rockhold. If you check one of Luke Rockhold's kicks, he will stop throwing that kick. But I love what you said about Benitez. He just keeps on throwing it. He might have a 9-inch gash on his shin. He's like, all right, like, you can keep on checking these kicks. They're going to keep on coming. And that's the great thing about Benitez's game. I know he has some holes in his game, and trust me, I'm going to say the positives before I get to the negatives, but these are two fighters in very different stages of their careers, because Benitez was a borderline top 15 talent. There was some hype around him for a little while, but now he's starting to fall, and we're just sort of wondering, okay, how far are we going to fall until we truly understand where Gabriel Benitez is?
And at what division?
And at what division, exactly. And with TJ Brown, it's like, okay, you haven't had the best start to your UFC career. Your only win is controversial. I'll let you get to that in a second. So, Benitez, if you can't beat TJ Brown, this is probably it for you. And that's why I think this is such an important fight for Gabriel Benitez, and why I'm putting a lot more stock into this fight than I ever thought I would. Because for Benitez, he's not somebody who people are going to tell their grandkids about in the future. Like, if either one of us ever have kids, we'll probably end up having a few drinks one day and being like, hey, you don't remember how good Gabriel Benitez was. He was the hardest pound-for-pound kicker in the UFC. But most people aren't going to remember those things. I, for one, though, will never forget. But Benitez does have one of those fight of the night styles that it's just going to age very well over time. Because like you said, he's got the great kicks. He's got a very odd form of grappling though. Because I put him into one of those categories to where if Benitez gets top pressure, he has great ground and pound and he can actually look like a very adept grappler. But defensively, it's just, there's a very big gap between his offensive grappling skills and his defensive grappling weaknesses.
His defensive grappling. So when you get put in an arm bar, what can you do? You can try and turn out of it, position yourself, spin out of it, or you can pick up Humberto Bandonai and knock him out, like Gerald Harris. Like, things like that
metal.
Don't happen very often. But for Benitez, he's got a performance of the night bonus against Bandonai, you know, the guy who won the Copa Combate, and he's got a performance bonus against Justin James, where he sent his spine through his back when he kneed him up the middle. He has fight of the nights against, well, his last fight, you know, against Billy Quarantillo, a guy who just fought Shane Burgos, one of the best fights of the year last year. So he has a lot of fun things. The weird thing in this one, though, again, for Benitez, is in the 5-on-in, 2 and 3, you look at the losses, Sadiq Youssef by knockout, Omar Morales in a bit of a close one, and then Billy Quarantillo, that was a fight of the night where Quarantillo knocks down Benitez in the first round, Quarantillo wins the second round, and then in the third round, just like that old Billy Talent song, there's nothing to lose when no one knows your name, Gabriel Benitez drops Quarantillo briefly, and then Quarantillo comes back to finish him in the third round. It was a very fun fight. It was mostly all Quarantillo, but it was a fun fight. And when I look at it for TJ Brown, so he beats Lockhart on Dana White's Contender Series some time ago, 2 years and 3 months ago, loses to Jordan Griffin by submission where he was beating him. He was doing a great job in the wrestling, and then he got a little tired, and then he got submitted. He loses to Danny Chavez. That was a close enough fight, but Chavez became the wrestler in that fight, and he's pretty well a pure striker.
Yeah.
And then he beats Kai Kamaka III by split decision. And if you're a Fight Night Picks fan, and you're telling your friends about this fight, and they know who Adelaide Bird is maybe, tell them this. When TJ Brown fought Kai Kamaka III on MMA decisions, 9 voters had it 29-28 Kamaka III. 6 voters had it 30-27 Kamaka III. Nobody had it for TJ Brown. But judges Michael Bell and Sal D'Amato had it 29-28 TJ Brown, and Adelaide Bird had it 30-27 for Kai Kamaka. If Kai Kamaka won that fight, probably wouldn't be back with Bellator, but he is, and TJ Brown would be 0-3 in the UFC. But here we are in a clash of styles of a fight where TJ Brown will strike until he needs to wrestle, and Gabriel Benitez will strike until he gets taken down because his takedown defense is 52% in the UFC over a very relatively long career. So I look at the odds in this one. Benitez open to minus 145, he's a minus 190. TJ Brown open to plus 125, he's a plus 158. And if we have a look at the Tapology votes, surprise to us, they are to you. 1,274 total votes, 81% Benitez, 62% by decision. For the 19% that have TJ Brown, 65% by decision. I got this to say. I wouldn't be very surprised if TJ Brown won this fight with just a pressure-heavy attack where he's able to not even withstand some of the strikes, just get straight from point A to point B and reach those takedown attempts. This, to me, feels like a parlay buster.
You gotta walk through what Kenny Loggins would refer to as the danger zone to get to that position, though. And against Gabriel Benitez, that danger zone is lethal. He can land knees up the middle. He can land straight shots up the middle. I think Benitez, like I said, he has fallen from sort of the peak Gabriel Benitez, if you will, peak Mowgli. But I think it's going to be enough to beat TJ Brown. I really do. When you're TJ Brown, and we're only talking about your one possible win in the UFC, being over Kai Kamaka III, and I understand a lot of people were upset when Kamaka III was let go by the UFC, but even he didn't have that good of a run, if we're being completely honest. So for Gabriel Benitez, he's beaten better fighters than TJ Brown in the past, and I do think that he's at least shown he's been competitive in his losses. It's not just a guy who's getting put out there against competition who's far better than him, and he's just going out for a paycheck. Like you had said, in the Billy Q fight, it was very, very competitive until he got finished at the end. And even in the Sadiq Youssef fight, people forget, I know he got finished by Youssef, who is a very, very good power puncher, but he dropped Youssef early on in that fight too. If you fight Gabriel Benitez, you're going to eat some clean shots, and unless you're Omar Morales up a weight class from where Benitez normally competes at, normally guys can't eat those shots. So I do like Benitez in this matchup, but I agree. If Brown's going to win, he's going to get done with his pressure.
For Gabriel Benitez in his illustrious UFC career, he's been taken down by Morrison, Cassius Clay Collard. Clay Collard, he boxes, but he took him down quite a bit. Andre Fili, Enrique Barzola, Jason Knight, and Billy Quarantillo. And for TJ Brown, he's been working his tie clinch a lot on the Instagrams with Coach Charlie Johnson. He's been at Glory MMA and Fitness with Dakota Bush, with Jeff Molina, with one of my favorite fighters that I can't wait to see in 2022. You know him as David Onama. Can't wait for it. He's such a good fighter. TJ Brown has a great shot in this fight, so don't sleep on him. I'm picking Gabriel Benitez with the striking, but again, I wouldn't be surprised at all. I can't stress this enough. If TJ Brown won this fight and he was able to grapple, just rinse and repeat with the takedowns against Benitez, who's shown that to be big time red flag in his game. So both of us right now going with Mexico's Gabriel Benitez, unless anything changes throughout the week, and you can check it out on Question Mark Kicks live 2 hours. It's QMK. People wonder what QMK is. That's it. Question Mark Kicks. Easy peasy 2 hours before the prelims. Check it out. You're not going to want to miss the rest of this card. Just keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Big time fight coming up this weekend for the Ultimate Fighter Season 11 Team Liddell middleweight winner Court the Crusher McGee, making his 31st pro appearance, and he's never been submitted. He's taking on Ramiz Brahimaj out of Fortis MMA, who's 9-3, and of those 9 wins, all of them by submission, 8 of them in the first round. Can Ramiz Brahimaj submit Court McGee? That's the question that we're looking to answer. And if you look at it for Ramiz Brahimaj, it's not just the submissions. Go back and watch his fights. This is a guy that when, the ESTD 2018, when I was getting started with Fight Night Picks almost 4 years ago, Ramiz was the guy that I was watching because it wasn't just his submission abilities. It was the fact that the guy throws hands and he has absolute power in his hands. He can drop guys, and then once he's got you dropped, you don't have to worry about him. There's some guys like, Jamal Emmers, when he fought Pat Sabatini. I've got him rocked. He's on the ground. I better dive in. Ramiz is one of those guys that when you're rocked, he dives in and he absolutely finishes guy. He's a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Trains with guys like Cesar Ferreira, Carlos Diego Ferreira, and Alex Morono over there at Fortis MMA. And really, the craziest part about that sentence is the fact that Diego Ferreira commutes, 8-9 hours just to go to that gym. So pretty crazy commitment for him there. But when we look at this fight, Ramiz coming out of the bigger gym, you look at it for Court McGee, coming out of a smaller gym, he's one of those guys that really hasn't left Utah a whole lot, but man, this guy has had a very, very impressive career in mixed martial arts, and you have to give credit where it's due.
Is he like your friend Brandon when he leaves Nova Scotia, has to point out that they don't have this when they're in his hometown?
Yeah, I mean, it'd be like if you live in New York and you went across the way to New Jersey and you went, geez, we don't have this in New York. We've never seen that before. But if we look at it for Court McGee, the 5-on-in, a win over Alex Garcia 3 years and a month ago, he loses Diego Lima, loses Sean Brady, loses Carlos Condit, beats Claudio Silva. And the craziest part about it for Court McGee is you look at his 3 losses there, and you thought maybe Father Time's starting to tap him in the shoulder, he's starting to slow down. And then he fought Claudio Silva, and Father Time went, hey, Claudio, you gotta go, pal. It's time to leave the UFC.
That's the problem. Father Time had a dub that night, okay? It just wasn't against Court McGee. That's the problem with Court McGee at this stage of his career. He's not a top-level UFC fighter anymore. I know that. Craig knows that. Everybody watching knows that. But this is really just the litmus test for Ramiz Brahimaj. I'm gonna have some fun at your expense, Craig. This is the fight to figure out if Ramiz Brahimaj is like Dustin Stoltzfus in Craig's mind. Is he that, eye-catching talent? Is he that submission specialist who can go out there, get the knockdowns, and then finish guys with submissions? Or is he just a false bill of goods and we never really see that version of him in the UFC? Because this is going to be that fight. And this is a very important point that I've been thinking about a lot, and I think it's going to be a big deal. Court McGee no longer has the chin that he used to have. If you hit him now, he will go down. Carlos Condit proved that. Condit doesn't have great power at this stage of his career by any means, but even he was able to put really good shots together on McGee and put him down. So that's going to be the big point for this fight. I think if Court McGee is the one using his offensive wrestling, it's a huge mistake, oddly enough. I think that's only going to tire himself out and make it tougher to defend submissions if he does find himself on the mat later on in the fight. I think it's going to be the complete opposite for Brahimaj. I think if Ramiz Ramiz is going for a lot of takedowns, it's the worst decision ever. Because if you're trying to take down Court McGee, one of the more difficult things to do in the welterweight division, but you're just going to be burning yourself out and hurting your chances to win the fight later on. Because I think this is going to be one of those weird bizarro fights where McGee can actually have a lot of success early on just with his steady pace, and I could see Brahimaj, as the fight goes on, getting the reads of McGee, maybe landing a big shot over the top at some point in the second or third round, and getting the submission late. Because I know that you brought up the fact about how Brahimaj gets it done a lot in the first round, and how Court McGee traditionally is known as more of a decision fighter, but I don't really see it that cut and dry. I actually do see McGee going out there and having some success early. I really do think the second round's where this one gets interesting.
If you look at it for Court McGee, he has 1 performance bonus in 18 UFC fights. It was his debut to win the Ultimate Fighter, which is kind of crazy. 15 of his 18 fights in the UFC have ended by decision. He's very well-rounded. He has not the greatest accuracy with his shots, and that is the most frustrating thing when you watch a Court McGee fight. It's like watching maybe Caitlin Chukagian later on tonight. He pushes forward, he throws a lot, but not a lot lands. But in the minds of maybe the judges, some of the people at home, maybe even the commentary, you might think, geez, well, he's just doing a lot, and there's a lot of forward pressure involved in it, but not a lot of finishes. And the weirdest thing about it for Court McGee, you look at some of those fights. Again, when he fights Sean Brady wasn't able to finish him. When he fought Diego Lima, they struck. And then when you watch the fight against Carlos Condit, myself, along with every MMA fan on Twitter, were tweeting and yelling at their TV, Court, just take him down. But Court McGee decided to strike with Carlos Condit, and then Carlos Condit at certain points decided to wrestle. So now you look at that fight against Claudio Silva, and Claudio did not look good. Like, Claudio was one of my guys, like those dark horses that I talk about. Like, if there was a backside to Mount Rushmore, the guys that used to get me excited and they were on these wild win streaks, Claudio Silva, Leonardo Santos, there's always fighters like that for everybody. Those are some of my guys. But again, Father Time has unfortunately tapped them both on the shoulder and said, you need to leave. So when I look at this fight, again, it really is tricky. Can McGee use the forward pressure? Can he use a lot of volume? Can Brahimaj break that distance and smash through with those good strikes? And is he able to get the submission win? So we look at the odds for this one. Brahimaj open to plus 100. He's still around there. Minus 102 is the average on best fight odds. For Court McGee, open to minus 120, minus 119 or thereabouts. Haven't looked at the Tapology votes. Surprised us they are to you. Matt, I'm going to set the over-under at 60% Brahimaj.
I think they're going to be over.
You think they're going to be over? Wow. 1,301 total votes, 51% Brahimaj, 62% by decision, 23% by submission. For the 49% that have Court McGee, 80% by decision. Again, Court McGee has had 30 fights in MMA. He's fought a good level of competition. I mean, the only knockout loss that he has in the UFC is to Santiago Ponzinibbio. Out of 18 fights, Ponzinibbio is the only one that knocked him out. Nobody's ever submitted him ever. Ramiz Brahimaj hits hard, submits guys, and puts him out in the first round. Look at what he did against Sasha Platnikov.
Sasha Platnikov is not.
It was easy. So, when I look at this fight, it really is tricky. I have a lot of stock in Brahimaj, but there's a little bit of bias there, especially with, hey, you find this guy early, it's like Petr Yan. I have other fighters.
But not everyone's Petr Yan.
But Ramiz Brahimaj, I hold in a little bit too high of regard. So, taking on a guy like Court McGee, I have Brahimaj, but I just have to put that one out there.
If you pick Court McGee in this fight, you're probably someone who gets excited about the buyout market in the NBA. Because if you've been following along for the last 2 years, Court McGee's not the same guy he used to be. I don't know why he's the favorite right now. It makes no sense to me. I understand you're going off of the potential of what he can do, and in his last fight, he fought somebody sort of similar stylistically to Brahimaj, just in the fact that they're both very dangerous on the mat. Of course, Brahimaj hits harder than Silva on the feet, but you get the idea. Similar matchups. If you've been following along, Court McGee's not the type of guy who can go out there, defend takedowns for a consistent 15
minutes.
Happen. Watch it happen, but still, you get the idea. Like, if you've been watching, especially the last few years, he's not the same guy he used to be. I just don't think he can go out there and take 15 minutes from an opponent. Now, if Brahimaj gets tired early on in the fight, then of course Court McGee can keep a steady pace later on. But that's less Court McGee going out there and winning the fight than Brahimaj giving the fight up. They're very different things. I think Brahimaj should win this, but if he loses, I'm sorry, Craig, I'm never letting you live it down. But I just don't know what Court McGee, his plan's going to be in this fight. Because on the feet, I think he's at a massive disadvantage. Because, like you said, his accuracy's not great at this stage of his career. He has a hard time just hitting the target. And if he does eat that one big shot, and if he does get dropped, I don't think he's going to have the submission defense, especially while rocked, to be able to fight Brahimaj off. So I think he could get one of those cardio king performances, a classic Alexis Davis at 125 type of a fight, perhaps. But I do like Brahimaj in this.
I mean, if you look at it for Brahimaj, that fight against Max Griffin is not a good example. If you want to go off of that one, I do have Brahimaj in this fight, but the confidence, Court McGee, he's a gamer. He's tricky. He's a tricky veteran. So let us know down below in the comments section who you have in this fight. Both of us right now going with Ramiz Brahimaj to get the win. You're not going to want to miss this fight, and the rest of them, including Calvin Kattar and Giga Chikadze up at the tops. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, as we always say. Let's get into it. Coming up this weekend at middleweight, we have a big time and interesting fight between Ugly Man Joseph Holmes, yes, that's his nickname, taking on the Night Wolf. Jamie Pickett. And when I look at this fight, it is the trickiest fight to try and pick correctly on this entire card. Stay away from it. I'm dead serious. Stay away from this fight because this really gets weird when you actually look at the two styles that these guys have. And I was supposed to start this video off by saying, Jonathan Pati, if you're out there, don't watch this video. I don't have anything nice to say. Don't watch this video. Because for both of these guys, Jonathan Pati, unfortunately for him, was their springboard into the UFC. If you look at it for Joseph Holmes, he fought on Contender Series this past year. He gets a win over Shante Barnes, finishes him in the second round. He fights Jonathan Pati with Fury FC. It was a looking for a fight episode. Dana White was in attendance. He finishes Pati and knocks him out cold. Pati, kind of was begrudging about the stoppage, but it was a good stoppage. For Jamie Pickett, he throws his 1,000-punch combo against Jonathan Pati over on Contender Series. The referee stops it. Then he comes into the UFC, fights Stefan Chukwe, and gets completely out-volumed and outstruck in that fight. He fights Jordan Wright. He gets knocked out. And then his last time out, he fights Laureano Staropoli. And I think I was the only person to pick Jamie Pickett to win that fight. Let's just pat myself on the back right there. But Laureano Staropoli came into the UFC looking really good, and he left with blonde hair and did not look good. So for Staropoli, I don't know if that's more of a conversation about him than it is about Pickett, but I will say Pickett brought a complete game to that fight, and I at least like to see that out of him, and I think that could pay out in this fight against Holmes, because for Pickett, he can grapple a little bit. He can strike with some good volume. As long as he's not getting backed up completely straight back, he has pretty decent fights. Now, he has struggled in those areas. If he gets into a firefight with somebody with big-time power like Jordan Wright, a kill-or-be-killed type fight, Jamie Pickett might not win in those exchanges. But he's taking on a Joseph Holmes, who I think is a very interesting prospect. I mean, the guy was 7-0 as an amateur in MMA, 7-1 so far as a pro, and his only loss was to Jordan Newman, a 2017-18 NCAA Division III champion. He was wrestler of the year in his division. Like,
impressive.
You lose that fight over with Bellator, and since then win 7 more. It really is tough, though, when you really break it down for Joseph Holmes, what kind of a fighter we're going to get in the UFC, because he seems like a guy that just kind of takes his time, and that can really cost you at middleweight in the UFC.
It can, but I don't know if it's going to cost him against Jamie Pickett. And I guess this is just a larger point about this fight. Are we going to set, all-time low volume number? Is this going to be the new Tyron Woodley versus Damian Maia? Because
or Lewis versus Ngannou?
It could be, because the thing with Pickett, and I think you set it up in the right way, he does have a very complete game, but it always depends on what his opponent brings to him, and then we see what version of Jamie Pickett we're going to get. Because, oddly enough, he's kind of a defensively oriented fighter, but not in the way of, an Alexander Volkanovski, who's I'm always putting pressure on you, and I'm making you react, reading your reads, and then making you pay for it. That's high-level stuff. With Jamie Pickett, it's okay, I'm going to keep my hands up, I'm going to defend your takedowns. If the opening's there, I'll start to unload a little bit, but it was very interesting in that Jordan Wright fight. It's almost like he kind of learned his lesson a little bit to where, okay, I'm going to be more hesitant once I do let my hands go, but that's a double-edged sword, because that's kind of when Jamie Pickett is at his best. When he is getting into some of those exchanges, then clinching up and making it a mixed martial arts fight, that's when he can be a very successful fighter. But again, it's never Jamie Pickett going out there and winning the fight. A lot of the time, it's, okay, his opponent's getting tired, or his opponent makes a big mistake, and then he's the one capitalizing on it. But if you go back and watch a lot of Joseph Holmes tape, this will still just be an open conversation, I guess, at this point. It was one of the weirder dives I've ever had on a UFC newcomer, because there's a lot of positives to look at when you do look at the tape, but when you really do the deep dive on his opponents and what his opponents' positives and weaknesses are, he's kind of in the same boat himself. He rarely goes out there and gets the win over his opponent. He's not somebody who's going to go out there, hit you with a right hand, take your back, and choke you out. It's his opponent's getting tired. His opponent makes a boneheaded decision and he capitalizes on it. It's a very strange route to get into the UFC because, like, we watch a lot of baseball, right? If you want to get to the major leagues, you have to be better than about a million other people who play your position. And you got to work every single day, making no money at all for years to hopefully get to your dream one day. For Joseph Holmes, he just kind of beat a lot of guys who weren't that impressive, and now he's finally in the big show.
I like what Joseph Holmes brings in. I mean, they call him a submission fighter, and he's very good with his trip takedowns. He's really able to kind of position his leg in such a way that he can kind of make you make the mistake. And I really think positionally oriented, especially up against the cage. And when he throws that jab out there, this is the thing with both of these guys. They're two of the longer middleweights you're going to find. Like in that Israel Adesanya type category, Alex Pereira, another one of those guys. Because again, 6'4" and 6'2", 80 inches plus of reach for both of these guys. But for Holmes, yeah, it was really weird. I listened to an interview that he did with Ryan Gerald, from Maine, friend of the show, and All Access MMA, and I really was, I read the headline and it was, I will finish Pickett in the first round. Okay, well, I like to see that, good on ya. And then I listened to it, and it was kind of a little odd. He trains at SFS MMA in the Dallas area. He's getting work in with Glory MMA and Fitness. You heard about that on his Dana White Contender Series fight. Laura Sanko spoke to it. Julian Marquez spoke to it. And here's the quotable from Julian Marquez on the man himself, Joseph Holmes. And I'm going to read it out. He has a powerful right hand. He listens very well, and he's not going to stop until he makes it.
Oh, no, Craig. They brought up personality as his second best strength.
He listens very well. And so that was a little weird. In the interview that he did with Ryan, he also said that he was 206 pounds in late December before Christmas. All right, that's not that bad. You're going to cut about 20 pounds. But then he also responded to a question saying, probably the heavier I normally am. But listen, 195 pounds, all I have to do is cut the water, and then it's another 10 pounds and I'm there. So I'm not totally worried about the short notice nature of this fight because it is short notice for Joseph Holmes. It was originally supposed to be two-time Contender Series appearer, I guess, Caio Borrello. But when I look at this fight, yeah, it was just weird, the tape study that I did. The Ryan Leninger fight, again, it's a lot of jabs, then 1-2 right cross, knee up the middle, Leninger falls down, we finish him. Michael Tover, 0-1, first round rear naked.
Diggs was not impressive whatsoever.
Dwayne Diggs, who was 3-2, second round rear naked choke. And then Holmes ends up on Contender Series, in October. He fights Shante Barnes, who was 34 at 6-1-1. Shante Barnes, to get into Dana White's Contender Series, beat Jay Ellis. Yeah, that Jay Ellis. He beat Jay Ellis.
Who hasn't?
Gerald Meerschaert.
That's true.
So he beat Jay Ellis, the guy who has 100 pro losses on his record. And then he beat another fellow that was 13-17 to get the shot. Joseph Holmes was a minus 435 favorite in that fight. Doesn't get the contract, even though he finished him in the second round. And then he fights Donovan Patti, finishes him, ends up in the UFC on short notice. So I like it, but very low volume. He talked about it in the interview with Ryan, the fact that when he goes to Glory Fitness and MMA, the things that he's working on, timing, footwork, and upping his volume, I love to hear that. At least, he's cognizant. Those are things that he's going to work on, and I think you're going to start to see that in some of his fights because his jab to right cross is lethal, and it's down the pipe. His speed's not the speediest. His power is there. And he's a submission fighter. So things that you like to see. But I look at the odds for this one. And Holmes open to minus 175. He's minus 156 right now. Pickett's open to plus 150. He's plus 130. The Tapology votes, I wouldn't be surprised if Holmes was a big fan favorite. 1,160 total votes, 80% Holmes, 25% by submission, 57% by knockout. For the 20% that have Pickett, 48% by decision, 37% by knockout. Matt, I think this is going to be one of the worst fights on this card.
I got a nickel in my hand. If it goes heads, I pick Pickett. If it goes tails, I pick Holmes.
Now, again, you're joking about this, but honest to goodness, for everybody out there, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, normally, the job of us at Fight Night Picks, we watch all the tape, we write down all the notes, I watch interviews, I do the Instagram, and then I boil it down into something you can enjoy. I implore you, go watch their fights for this one and come up with your own assumptions and comments. I want to hear from people down below more than any other fight on this card. I want to hear from you on this one. I think Joseph Holmes has a great MMA pedigree, whether it's amateur, whether it's pro. Maybe the level of competition isn't quite there, but I like what I see. Tall, rangy fighter at middleweight. I think he's got the skills. It's just going to take a little bit of refining, and I think Glory MMA is a great place to train to try and add to that skill set. For Jamie Pickett, he gets knocked out, but he has decent volume and decent wrestling. So it's going to come down to those two things. Can Holmes bring his A game? Can Pickett not get knocked out?
I don't like the pick. I guess I'll ask you this first. Did Joseph Holmes give himself that nickname, or did someone in the gym give it to him?
I have no idea.
I feel like they definitely threw hands if someone else gave it to him. That's not something you can just walk up.
He has a nice mustache.
He does. No, I like Jimmy Pickett in this matchup. Now, that might be against my best judgment, but I think he can defend some of those trip takedowns that Joseph Holmes does use, because that was a big thing that I noticed in the tape study too, is that Holmes likes a lot of his takedowns from the clinch position, and Jimmy Pickett can at least stay sound defensively in some of those clinch exchanges. Now, is this going to look like a great fight? No, I don't think it will, and I do think this could be one of those fights where one big action per round can probably get the win. Like, if Holmes is able to get one takedown with like 50 seconds left in the round, I know that's not often scored all that heavily, like you need a lot of control time, you do need to work, but this could be one of those fights where, a quick takedown at the end of the round, well, that was the biggest action, so we'll just score it to him. But I do think Pickett can at least be the more steady fighter throughout this fight. Again, I might look like an idiot come Saturday, but you could tell me that this fight goes any which way, and I could believe it.
I like Pickett, especially when he's backed up behind that black line that you see in the octagon. A lot of fighters aren't very good there. Pickett's one of those guys that it just depends on the matchup, but he can be, especially, he's very sound with his body weight. I know that sounds very meta. I know I might sound a little bit like fellow Canadian Robin Black, but in this fight, I love the 1-2 out of Joseph Holmes, and I think it's going to pay out to great effect, and I think he's got very, very sneaky power for this division if he's able to hurt Pickett on the feet, finish the fight down on the mat. So I'm going to go with the prospect in this fight in Joseph Holmes, ugly man. Matt's got Jamie Pickett, but if you feel confident about this fight, I want to hear from you down below. We want a big-time year in 2022, and we need to hear from you. It is a big-time card coming up this weekend, headlined by Calvin Kattar and Giga Chikadze. You're not going to want to miss. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Cheers to 2022 and resolutions you can actually keep. How about having clean and shiny balls all year round? Our sponsors at Manscaped are here to save your balls this year and make the ball drop into 2022 the cleanest and sexiest ever. See your first New Year's resolution with good intentions and join the 4 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped with our exclusive offer. Go to manscaped.com and use the code FNP for 20% off and free shipping. We're ringing in the new year this year, 2021, with Manscaped. We've been doing it for about a year. Well, that's the thing. 2021 to 2022. It has been an absolutely wild year, and you guys have been supporting us and checking out our sponsors, and it really does help us. So if you haven't already, manscaped.com, promo code FNP, you get 20% off and free shipping. And listen, for new grooming routines going into this year, I'm the type of guy that is not proactive. I get reactive with my nose hair trimming. I do it every single week here on the show. We tee-hee, we laugh about it, then I go through the other nostril, but wow.
You can hear it in work.
You can hear it, and you can hear it work. But that's one of those things. I have to be more proactive about this stuff rather than realizing, wow, this is way too late. So that's kind of what I need to do. What do you need to do? I don't care. I don't want to know. No, what do you do?
I need some of that shampoo and body wash in my life.
All right, so that's fair. So it is New Year, New Me with the global leaders in below-the-waist grooming. And this year, take your package to the next level with their Performance Package 4.0. You got to check that one out. But also the brand new Ultra Premium Body Wash. And the best part about it is cologne fragrance refined, and that's the same fragrance that you know and love. And listen, I keep everything in the bag, but you can also pick some of this up. It's a refined cologne over on their website. If you do choose the Performance Package 4.0, there's a lot of great ads in there. You've got the ball deodorant. It's a crop preserver. Slap that stuff on. And listen, sometimes you need it in the morning when you're getting ready. The Crop Reviver Ball Toner, just nice little spritz. Yes. Maybe you walk into it, maybe you don't. And, of course, I already talked about it, the Weed Whacker, but the big one, the Lawnmower 4.0. I mean, I have the travel lock on right now, which I need, and I talk about it all the time. 1, 2, 3, and then all of a sudden, the lights go down. 4000K LED, you can see that on the screen. But the nice thing, ceramic edge blade, you can pop the top off, clean it off, grease up your motor if you need to. It's just the ease of use. The products are very simple, and at the same time, they're not, because again, the charging port for this Lawnmower 4.0, look at this thing. Set that on your vanity. It's a good look, but all sorts of great stuff. And as I mentioned, Matt, I mean, you guys supporting our sponsors, it really helps keep the channel afloat, and we really do appreciate it. So listen, kick discomfort and poor hygiene to the curb this year and use the best tools for the job. Whether your resolution is to work out more or travel to new places, be sure to travel to manscaped.com for our exclusive offer of 20% off and free shipping with the code FNP. Cheers to new balls in 2022. Get 20% off and free shipping with the code FNP at manscaped.com. That's 20% off and free shipping at manscaped.com, and use the code FNP. It's new year, no pubes in 2022 with Manscaped. We have some big time fights coming up on this card. Thank you so much for checking out our sponsors, and keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. As we always say, let's get into it. And a welcome to the UFC. Brazil's Joanderson Brito, he is taking on a very tough test in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania's own Bill Algeo. His nickname is Senor Perfecto. It's been anything but that in the UFC. And for Bill Algeo, a fight of the night against Ricardo Lamas in his debut, a loss on Contender Series to Brendan Loughnane, and sandwiched in between those two fights, he takes on Tim Dooling over with CFFC. 9-7, Tim Dooling gets the win by decision. So he loses to Lamas in Lamas' retirement fight. He then goes out and beats Spike Carlisle in a classic Spike Carlisle fight where Carlisle starts off strong and then fades. So in that fight, Algeo gets the win, and then his last time out, he takes on Ricardo Ramos in a fight where I thought Bill Algeo was going to win, and it turns out Ricardo Ramos has only been training in wrestling shoes with Team Alpha Male, and Algeo had absolutely no way to stuff any of those takedowns. And that's the big key to a fight like this. And I've talked too much about Bill Algeo, so I'll leave that where it is. For Joanderson Brito, this is going to be your favorite fighter's favorite fighter. He is the most exciting prospect I've seen in a long time coming into the UFC. I have specific examples and things that I want to talk about, but when this guy strikes, it's like watching my dog trying to swim. He's throwing everything into it, and he wants every single part of it. Matt, I absolutely love watching Joanderson Brito fight.
He is a very, very exciting prospect, especially for this division. But there's some negatives that come along with his style. Now, when we talk about the positives that Joanderson Brito brings into the cage, it is windmill-type power and shots. He does throw those big looping overhands with both sides. I do think that's an important point. Has great power in his right and left hand. He's not just a one-side dominant puncher. Like when people talk about Deontay Wilder being the hardest puncher of all time, they often specify, well, he's the hardest right-hand puncher of all time, whereas Mike Tyson's probably the best ambidextrous power puncher of all time. Brito is more similar to Mike... I can't believe I'm saying this. Brito is more similar to Mike Tyson, to where he does have great power in both hands, and you can see that throughout his fights. He is an orthodox fighter, but honestly, his left hook might be his best. It might be his best weapon. It's not something that he always follows his right hand with, but when he does vary it up, especially after going to the body, it catches his opponent off guard a lot, and that's why this fight's going to be really interesting. You had mentioned that you had made the graphic this way because there is such a height difference between these two fighters. I think the height difference and how both fighters are going to play sort of the height difference in this fight is going to be very important, because for Algeo, we've seen him have a lot of success against guys shorter than him, but we've also seen him really struggle with it too. He's one of these weird fighters who has a very specific Goldilocks zone to where his strikes do the most power. When he's at long range, when guys are coming in on him, he can crack them from far away, and it really hurts them. Like, Lamas was what, the 7th ranked, 8th ranked featherweight in the world when they fought, and he hurt him a couple times down the stretch in that fight, and it was one of those performances to where, yeah, you didn't get the win, but sometimes you gain stock even in a loss, and I think Algeo, that was a perfect example of that. But ever since, it has been so odd, and I know we've both talked about this on the camera and off the camera, of just where does Algeo fit into this division? Because when you do, not even fight to fight, just minute to minute almost in his fights, you look at some of the things that he's doing and you're like, wow, this is so high level, checking leg kicks, following with hooks, like this is a guy who could be in the top 15. Then you look at him not be able to defend any takedown attempts from a much smaller guy. I always worry about where does Algeo's strengths keep him in this division, and how far down are his weakness going to hold him back.
Loughnane took him down 3 times. Lamas took him down 5 times. Carlisle took him down 4 times. Ramos took him down 8 times. Like, I really don't like to see that at all. And for Joanderson Brito, we talk about the wild striking, the fun style, and that is what he brings to the cage. He's a guy that just spams takedowns. He'll go for double legs. He'll throw you around. Like, this is a guy that bangs and thrashes. Like, if you like Davison Figueiredo, and I can't take credit for that because I saw somebody out there on Twitter make that comparison, I absolutely love it. This is a guy that has so much fun when he's fighting, and he is the wildest man ever. And if you want to see the perfect example out of that, and I'm going to make a couple of examples, but his fight against Jose Mariscal, who the nickname in that fight was Chepe. In that fight, you look at the referee, and he stood absolutely no chance. But if your name is Curtis Thunder, you'd think, hey, Curtis, you're going to stand a chance. So what happens? Brito goes out there, and before the fight even starts, they go into the middle, and they're jawing as the ring announcer is announcing Joanderson Brito. He's standing in there trash-talking. English is not his first language, and he's absolutely going at it.
That life.
So Mr. Thunder does his thing, splits them up. They start to fight. Joanderson rushes in there, and when I watch him fight, it's either, is this guy going to glove tap, or is he going to be like a dick on UFC 4, and are we going spinning wheel kick and Craig gets knocked out? Well, it could be either or, but in that one, they're jawing. Joanderson kicks him in the cup. His opponent goes to grab his cup. Mr. Thunder goes, all right, stop, and Joanderson goes, bang, bang, and knocks him and wobbles him. And then the fight starts back up. Joanderson goes in there, throws bombs, goes body kick, right hook, left hook, knocks him dead. So again, I am very hyped up on Joanderson Brito, but this is what I have to say. Hyped up in some of his fights. If you want to go back and see some bad spots, he fights Wellington Prado. That fight is wild. Listen, if you go all the way into second round, he's almost all the way submitted, and then he just kind of muscles himself out of it and ends up finishing his opponent. In his fight against Iwasaki, first round he wins. Second round, his opponent wins the whole round. And then in the third round, his opponent wins pretty well the whole thing, and then he rallies and gets a TKO, does Brito. Again, this guy hasn't lost a fight in years and years. He's 11-0-1 in his last 12 fights. Like, I couldn't be more excited about this fighter. And the other weird thing is, such a height disadvantage, not at a reach disadvantage, oddly enough.
Yeah, he does have a very good wingspan.
But for Brito, you look at his last fight, he was lined very, very, closely with Diego Lopez, a guy who had wins over UFC competition outside of the UFC. They had a really close fight, and I was honestly surprised. He kept popping his hands out there.
Thank you.
Chris Tognoni goes, hey, stop that. Okay, so then they stop it. Eventually, Diego Lopez has an issue with one of his eyes. And then in the third round, bang, eye rake, technical decision. 3 judges scored at 29-28 for Brito. And after that fight's over, Dana White's comments on him is the fact that, and I want to make sure I get this absolutely right, Sean Shelby gave Brito the lead-in before the fight, so you knew there was something afoot. And then after the fight, this was it. I actually think that Brito is possibly going to be one of the next great Brazilian fighters. That's what Dana White said about him. So, high praise on Brito. I've talked a lot about Brito. Now I'm going to answer your question. I think I'm really high on Bill Algeo, and I think everybody else is, and we think he's a top 15 fighter. But I don't know if he's a top 15 fighter based on the way that he's looked in these 3 fights. Fight of the night against Lamas, near the end of his career, at the end of his career. Yeah. Losing against Spike Carlisle until Carlisle gets tired. Credit to Algeo for having the cardio and being able to win the fight. And then not looking good against Ramos. It's really hard to tell what Algeo you're going to get. I know with Joanderson Brito, he's going to fight into exhaustion.
He is, but thank you. He is. Yeah, that's when we talk about things like he's so powerful. He muscles his way to positions. There's a give and there's a take to having a style like that. When you fight like Jessica Andrade, yeah, you're going to get knockouts. Yeah, you're going to get cool takedowns. You know what else is going to happen? You're going to get hit clean in your pursuit of all those big actions. And that's my big problem with Brito. Even in his wins, as spectacular as they are, he gets hit going forward all the time. Like, I know it's not the same division, but Sean O'Malley probably keeps Joanderson up at night because Sean O'Malley would move on his back foot left and right and pick him apart as he moves forward. And this is my other big problem with this fight. I worry about Algeo's ability to defend the takedowns, but I don't know if I worry about his ability to defend Brito's takedowns. And let me clarify, because Brito's not a traditional wrestler. He doesn't go for a lot of single legs or double legs. It's a lot of, I get the body lock and I'm trying to muscle my way to the ground. Now, yes, he does have some good body locks and there is some good technique to what he's done, but it feels like he's almost doing his own form of wrestling to where I get the feel I've got my own few good moves, but it's not like he's going to go out there and wrestle Algeo up against the cage. At least I don't think he will. I don't think he possesses that ability to really start chaining takedown attempts together. I think we're going to see the big action out of Brito. If he gets the takedown, great. If he doesn't, probably get a reset off of that. And that's where I think Algeo is actually going to have a lot of success. I think when they do kind of reset after their big actions, that's when Algeo is going to start getting his reads, using those water in the basement techniques to where he's chopping down the legs, he's going to the body. And I know personally, I'm quite down on Bill Algeo, and I'm really high on Joanderson Brito coming into the UFC, but stylistically, I actually think this is a pretty good matchup for Algeo.
Yeah, 100%. If you look at it for Brito, last thing for me, I mean, this is a guy that went to the school of Julian Lane, and it's like his teacher was Michael Hill. I do let you bang. I do. So for Brito and for Algeo, I think this is a great matchup. We're going to learn a lot about both these fighters. And if Algeo loses, hopefully that's not it for him in the UFC. I think he's a very, very entertaining fighter. And for Brito, if he loses, man, there are a lot of question marks out there. So we look at the odds. They both open at par. Algeo, slight underdog, plus 108 right now. And for Brito, slight favorite, minus 131. We look at the Tapology votes. Haven't seen them yet. Surprise to us, they are to you. I'm going to set the over-under at 75% Joanderson Brito.
I'm going to say under.
We look at it, 1,328 total votes, 82% Brito, 70% by decision for the 18% that have Algeo, 71% by decision. So the fans think that it's going to go to a decision. I've got Joanderson Brito in this fight, but man, Bill Algeo, again, you think long-range weapons, you think tall, lanky guys. Would Matt Allen be able to beat Joanderson Brito?
I'd destroy him on a basketball court.
Yeah, but not in MMA. This guy is absolutely blood and guts a fighter, but when he goes for those wild takedown attempts and when he really leaves himself out there and gets reckless, Algeo's one of those guys that can snatch up a neck, even if he's on bottom position. Brito gives up top position like it's going out of style. I have a hot take. He gets into opponent's guards, and then he's just doing so many things that his opponent's able to reverse him. And I've seen guys that have no business in the UFC beating Joanderson Brito for moments on the ground until Joanderson just pops out of it and finishes him. He's like if Bruno Silva slimmed down to 145 and Vanderlei Silva and every other reckless fighter you can think of. And now we get Joanderson Brito.
I don't know if Anderson Silva's a reckless fighter.
No, Vanderlei Silva.
Oh, there you go.
There we go.
Here's the problem. I think Joanderson Brito could go like 0-3 in the UFC and we completely forget who he is. Like, there's a world out there where that happens because of how reckless his style is. I am going to pick Bill Algeo in this one. I don't even feel great about the pick, if I'm being honest, but again, when I look at what Algeo struggles at, it's chain wrestling. He can defend that initial takedown attempt. It's just when guys start to get him up against the cage, go for the one leg, then mix the two, that's when he does struggle. Joanderson Brito does not go for those type of takedowns. It's a lot of those open mat, explode forward. I almost said Chael Sonnen takedowns, but you get what I mean. Like, Chael Sonnen would double leg you, get around the legs, do more technique to it. But Brito, it is all gas, no brakes, and I don't think that's going to be good enough to beat Bill Algeo.
I'm going with Channel 5's Joanderson Brito. Matt going with King of Prussia, Pennsylvania's own Bill Algeo, Senor Perfecto. Can he beat Perfecto on Saturday night? We'll find out, and I can't wait for our main event in this division. Calvin Kattar taking on the man himself, Giga Chikadze. Hit up that comment section like it's going out of style. Let us know who you have in these fights and keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. As we always say, let's get into it. If you know who's going to win this fight, I want to hear from you down below in the comment section. Coming up this weekend, we have the prototype Jake Collier. He was a prototype at middleweight, now we're up at heavyweight, taking on the Vanilla Gorilla Chase Sherman, a guy who, in the minds of the fans, in the hearts of the fans, he has had a big impact on the heavyweight division since about 2017. But he's 3-7 in the UFC. He's 1-2 in his return, and his last tweet was on October 10th, 2021. He used to be the gift king. Remember in 2017-18 when Chase Sherman was slugging it with who?
The Daywalker?
Elias Theodorou on Twitter, and they were just trying to vie for the crown of gift king? Well, now we're here. And for Chase Sherman, it's been a weird bag, I guess, so to say, in his return to the UFC. I mean, he left. He goes over to Island Fights. He looks really good with his boxing. It's crisp. His leg kicks are good, and they're still good in the UFC. But he goes out there and he fights Ike Villanueva. And he wins that fight. He gets cracked a couple of times, but he cracks back. He wins that one. Then he takes on Andrei Arlovsky, and that's a big opportunity. The forever litmus test. I think he's going to fight till he's 70. He could fight in a chair.
The Tom Brady of the UFC.
He'd still beat some guys in the UFC, but you go back, you watch that fight, and for Sherman, it was kind of different because that was his first camp at Elevation. He had moved things to Colorado to get ready for that one, and it was still the same old Chase Sherman, but He had a good first round, and then the second round, and then the third round, it wasn't necessarily as good. So he switches things up again, and for his last fight, and his last time out, he took on Parker Porter. He loses a decision in that one. He's now out of Sanford MMA. He's out of Sanford for this fight as well, as all signs point to over on Instagram. And it is an interesting one. I mean, when you're training out of Southern Florida, you're at Sanford, you're going to have like Linton Vassell, you're going to have Steve Mowry. They're the Bellator heavyweights that I can think of, but you're going to have some good training partners for sure. You're going to get the work in to accentuate your striking. For Jake Collier, still out of the Pit MMA, and if you look at it for him, since he's kind of come back, he had that fight against Marcel Fortuna. It was fun. It was a great finish. Then he fights Tom Aspinall a little over a year and a half ago.
How did that fight go, Craig?
That was just stupid. It was mismatched. It really was. But you didn't know what Collier was going to look like in the comeback. He gets finished in that fight. His last two fights are very similar to Chase Sherman's fights, and I have the numbers to back it up. He fights Jean Vellante, wins a decision. That's actually a fun fight to go back and watch. He fights Carlos Felipe, he loses split decision. But Matt, the big point that I have, and I got to go to the numbers on this one, these guys actually fight very similarly. Jake Collier's a little bit more flashy with some of his strikes, even though he definitely cuts now to make the heavyweight limit. But I have this to follow it up. If you look at the fight that Collier had, Vellante Felipe, the fights that Sherman had against Arlovsky, and then his last time out against Parker Porter, for Collier against Vellante, 13% of his strikes are to the leg. Against Felipe, 18% of his strikes are to the leg. In total, Collier against Vellante went 126 of 277 for his total strikes, which is insane. And when he took on Vellante, I mean, listen, it's just absolutely insane to see numbers like that. Then when you look at it against Felipe, 130 to 281. Tons of volume. The percentage, not necessarily the greatest. And then body strikes. He went 19 of 29 to the body against Vellante, and then in his next fight out, 20 of 26 to the body against Felipe. And the weirdest part about that one was the fact that forward pressure and the taunting from Carlos Felipe won that fight in the minds of the judges. 2 of the 3 of them
Craig
scoring it for
disagrees
Felipe.
with another split.
I thought Collier won that fight. Way better volume, way better percentages too. But all of this to say, when you compare both of these guys, you look at it for Sherman, he fights Arlovsky, 19% of his strikes are to the leg. His next time out against Parker Porter, 28% are leg kicks. These guys are heavyweights that throw leg kicks, and sometimes they slow down as the fight goes on.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I don't really know what to add to this right now because you kind of covered it all. These guys are both just an archetype of volume strikers in the heavyweight division. Are they the best at it? No, that would probably be Andrei Arlovsky right now. And even if you want to give more credit, that'd probably be like a Cyril Gane or even a Stipe Miocic, closer to the top of the division because they have that unique mix of power and volume. Whereas Sherman can get knockout wins, but a lot of things have to go right for that to happen. The leg kicks really have to chop you down. You do have to have poor cardio yourself for him to sort of get that momentum and get the volume numbers high enough to start to beat you down. I agree with you though. These two fighters are very similar in the way that they employ their volume. The big difference though is that I've seen Chase Sherman just sort of start off slow and never be able to regain momentum. And maybe not start off slow, because you're right, he did win early on in the Arlovsky fight, but you can tell that once things start to slip away from Sherman, he doesn't make in-fight adjustments all that often to then get the momentum back, because that Arlovsky fight was easily winnable. Like, they were doing the exact same thing early on in the fight, but the difference was, and I remember bringing this up, both guys throw leg kicks. Does Chase Sherman check them? Not really. Whereas Andrei Arlovsky can use his movement, can check a few leg kicks to where, okay, if we are basically even throughout our strikes, but I'm making you pay for your leg kicks and then you have to eat mine, well, it's going to hurt you a lot more than it's going to hurt me. I also like the point that you brought up about how Collier does cut weight to make 265, but I still think he's the faster guy on his feet because he does use left to right movement a lot better than Chase Sherman. Sherman's a lot of forward and back, and that's about it. And he can get caught sometimes when he moves straight back. And that's why I think Collier will and can have success in this matchup. If he can just change strikes together as he moves forward, I think one of them will land. Now, is it going to be enough to put Sherman down? Maybe not, because Sherman, one of his better attributes, he does have a pretty good chin.
Oh, yeah.
I know he's been knocked out in the past, but like, look at the Wall-Harris combination. It's one of the great heavyweight combos of all time. People don't talk about that knockout. It's a very, very nice one. Sherman can take a lot of abuse in his fights, but I do think Collier's the slightly better fighter in every aspect. I think he's a little bit faster in the feet. Maybe Sherman has a little bit more power. I just don't think it's going to really come to that. I think we're going to get probably a decision out of these two, and it's probably going to have really good numbers again. It's really interesting. I guess I'll give you the question. Do you think either one of these guys can get into the top 15? Like, this is what, the fourth fight of the night? This is on the main card. Like, do you think either guy could, or are they just kind of stuck being those fun outside the ranking heavyweights?
Not on Sunday after this one. And when I look at this, I mean, for Sherman, I think when you're training at a gym like Sanford MMA, you're going to make gains, and that just shows out. I mean, you've seen the fighters from that gym have absolute success in the UFC and in some of the other leagues as well. I mean, look at take any fighter. Michael Chandler. Kamaru Usman goes from gym to gym. Gilbert Burns. There's so many good fighters over there. But when I look at it for Sherman, it is a very difficult one. The fight goes the distance prob's actually a minus, which is crazy because Sherman, the large majority of his wins are by knockout. And for Collier, he definitely has that power too. You want to go see a good fight for him? Look at him finish Uda. It's a spinning back kick in that one. Crazy stuff there. But I look at this one, I do have a hard time because for Sherman, he throws typically a higher percentage of leg kicks, but after the first round, they kind of start to fall down a little bit. Both these guys will strike to the body quite a bit. You look at the odds for this one, Sherman open to minus 115. He's a plus 105 right now. Jake Collier open to minus 105. He's minus 128. The votes on Tapology, surprise to us, they are to you. And 1,326 total votes, 74% Sherman, 67% by knockout for the 26% that have Collier, 64% by decision, 28% by knockout. It is really tricky because, again, both these guys will play the volume game. They'll step back a little bit, then they'll go in and throw a single body shot, then they'll step back a little bit, throw some combinations. Both guys, I would say, have decent chins. Again, you said it. I mean, Collier got knocked out by Tom Aspinall. That was a crazy win for Aspinall, and I think he's going to challenge for a title. If it's not this year, maybe next year, but like it's if Cyril Gahn can do it, Tom Aspinall is going to be able to do it. And for Chase Sherman, it really is a tricky one. So we look at it, 2-3 in the 5-1 in for Collier, 3-2 for Sherman. 2 of those wins outside of the UFC with island fights for Collier. 2 of those 3 wins, or 2 of those 3 fights even. The Fortuna fight was just over 4 years ago. The fight against Devin Clark was 4 years and 8 months ago. What's the pick here? Because I think Sherman does have a really good chance. I mean, if he can catch Collier behind the black lines, not making those moves side to side, you can tee off if you need to. It is a tough one, though.
I agree with you that if Sherman can back up Collier, he can have success, but I don't think he's going to have that opportunity a lot. The problem with Sherman is that, I forget which fight, I think it was Borshchev earlier on in the card, where when he does get pressured, he puts his hands straight up just to try to defend the punches. Chase Sherman has that exact same problem in his game. He puts his hands up and backs straight up. That's how Walt Harris knocked him out. Walt Harris put one hand behind his neck because he knew he was going to pop his head up, brought it down and kneed him in the head. It was beautiful. Now, does Jake Collier have the explosiveness of Walt Harris? No. Walt Harris is one of the best knockout artists in the division's history. Collier is a middleweight who's moved up. But I gotta be honest, I like the smaller, I guess, bigger guy in this fight than I do Chase Sherman. I do think the movement of Collier is going to give Sherman problems. If Sherman lands some effective leg kicks early, maybe I'll be eating my words, but I do think Collier can win this one.
I think Sherman with the new camp, second time out, usually see those improvements in the second fight from a new camp. First fight, it's either lights out. It's like getting a new coach in any sport. Usually that team goes out there like the Vancouver Canucks with Bruce Boudreau. We're getting a big win first time out after being terrible. So for Sherman, maybe second time out is the charm. I have Jake Collier ever so slightly in this fight, but I got to be totally honest. I have zero confidence in unranked heavyweights when you're just going out there, slugging it out, and playing a volume game. Like, it really is a tricky game, and the margins are so fine. I thought Collier won his last fight, but he didn't. And it was the exact same fight that I expect coming out in this one.
So we both have this is pretty much, it's a very close 50-50 fight. Do you think it'll be inside the distance or will it go the distance?
I don't care to pick the prop. Honest to goodness, I don't.
Okay.
I really don't. So Matt, both of us going with Jake Collier in this one. I think it's going to be a fight that's going to happen this weekend. But in the main event, Calvin Kattar taking on Giga Chikadze, and I can't wait for it. Let's keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, as we always say.
Let's get into it.
Future title challenger Kai Kara-France will be watching this fight with bated breath because 2 of his former common opponents, Brandon Royval, Raw Dog, is going to be taking on Rogerio Bontorin out of Brazil. Now, for Rogerio, his last time out was at 135, but it wasn't because he weighed 137. He took on Matt Schnell, and I thought it was going to be an interesting fight. I think you're going to see some parallels in this fight with Brandon Royval when you compare him to Matt Schnell. And for Bontorin, the weight miss was worrisome. But he won that fight, and he looked pretty good in that one, like he has at 125. And the weirdest thing about Bontorin, and I know I've touched on this in previous videos, because he has been in the UFC for some time. He gets his shot over on Dana White's Contender Series in 2018, wins that fight, and then fights fellow 14-1 fighter, Magomed Bibulatov, where he's a giant underdog. Like, plus 255, I'd say that's a pretty big underdog. Wins that one by split decision. That's one of those fun fights that you want to go back and see a good one. It's that one. Very underrated. Then he beats Raulian Paiva, where there's a great shot. Raulian's eyebrow explodes, and he gets the win. And then if you look at it, Bontorin fights Ray Borg, loses the decision, fights Kai Kara-France back and forth, almost finishes Kai, then he gets finished himself, and then he has the Schnell fight. So for Bontorin, he goes through the adversity of losing 2 fights in the UFC. For Brandon Royval, that adversity's now. He's lost 2 in a row, loses against Brandon Moreno in a title eliminator, loses to Alessandro Pantoja's last time out. The crazy thing for me is, in my mind's eye, before doing any of the research, I thought, geez, Brandon Royval, well, he's coming back off that shoulder surgery finally. Totally forgot about the Pantoja fight. That fight did not go well.
It really didn't, and it was one of those weird fights where he's coming off of an injury, he had surgery, so how much were you really in the gym before that? But he didn't look great against Pantoja his first fight back. Now, a lot of guys don't look great against Pantoja in their first fight back, or first fight in the UFC. A lot of people have struggled against Pantoja on the feet and on the mat, so I don't know if we can put a ton of stock in that fight, and I'll say it for this reason. I think Pantoja and Bontorin are very different fighters, although they do have similarities, because I thought I was going to get a classic Craig weird face there, because they both have great submission skills, they both have power on the feet, but they're very different in the way that they display those things, because Pantoja can set up his strikes in the feet far better than Bontorin can, and he's a much more physically strong fighter than Bontorin is. Now, I can be honest, I was with Bontorin after his Kai Kara-France fight, where BlackBerry is like today with their company. I had sold I sold all my stock in it. I thought it was gone forever, and I never thought we were going to see the best version of it, because I thought, okay, Bontorin, you're a good grappler, but we kind of know what it is. You've got that one big burst, and then if you can get past that burst, you can beat him. But what he did to Matt Schnell, I know he missed weight, up a division, was very impressive to me, because Matt Schnell is such a well-rounded fighter. He's got great submissions. Yes, he doesn't have the best chin in the world, but still.
That's it. That's the knock.
Exactly. He is an extremely, extremely talented mixed martial artist. And for Bontorin to go out there, overwhelm him on the feet, mix in his grappling, it was so impressive, and it was one of those performances that made me completely rethink the way that I thought his career might play out, because... And this is where I'll hand it off to you. At 136.7, or whatever he weighed in at, he did look very good. Do you think we will get at least a similar fighter to what we saw at bantamweight? Or do you think he will fall back into some of those problems he showed at featherweight? Will he kind of be a step behind? Or not featherweight, sorry, down at flyweight.
We've never seen Bontorin miss weight at 125. That's what makes it so weird at 135. It was short notice. It was this, it was that, so on and so forth. So I won't focus on those particulars too much because of the nature of the last fight. But at 125, it hasn't been the biggest issue. Now, is this a guy that cuts a lot of weight? Yeah, I mean, look at him. Yeah, at 125, 100% it is. And for Brandon Royval, the opposite can be said. Why aren't you fighting at bantamweight? He's so long, he's so tall, he's so lanky. Like, it is a weird one for him. And if you look at it for Brandon Royval, okay, so he loses to Moreno. He was having fun until...
He was doing well in some of those grappling exchanges.
Same thing in the Kai Kara-France fight. That was a great fight. They were having some fun. Each guy was having success. He had a great debut against Tim Elliott where he gets, what was it, a fight of the night against him? Great Finishes fight. Him in the second round. It's a lot of good stuff. The losses outside of the UFC. Casey Kenny. That's fair. Nick Urso. Good, good test. Ricky Palacios, he was pretty good. Won on Contender Series. Thought he'd end up in the UFC, but he didn't. So coming into this fight, Brandon Royval, what's he good at? Sweeping guys, finishing them on the mat, having a lot of fun with the stand-up, but is his striking his bread and butter? Not so much, but he's trying to fix those holes. He's made the switch over to Factory X, and it's been some time now, so he's definitely working those things out. I think training with a bigger guy like an Alexander Hernandez would be great for this matchup. Rogerio Bontorin is sneaky. So when I look at the odds for this one, Royval opened, I guess I should say they both opened at par. Royval minus 167. If you look at it for Bontorin, somewhere around a plus 139. If I set the over-under at 67.5% for Royval, would you say over or under?
I'll say over.
Topology votes? 1,398 total votes, 84% Royval, 54% have him to win by submission. For the 16% that have Bontorin, 58% have him to win by decision. So Matt, the odds in Royval's favor right now, and the voters all just about have Royval in this fight. So what can you say on this one?
So, you remember the game Baggage? It was that dating show? Of course you remember it.
John Boy got in some hot water on that
So,
one.
Brandon Royval, we've talked a lot about his positives, but there's that one big baggage that he's yet to open. And it's, yeah, my offensive grappling is really good, but my defensive grappling is suspect.
But Matt, what about that?
Exactly. That is a very big red flag for me because Royval is so good, like you said. He's so flashy and everything he does is so unorthodox. And when I look at Brandon Royval, that line from Skyfall comes into my mind. It's security through obscurity because nothing he does is normal. It all is so obscure and so unique that that's where he does find a lot of his success in the cage. I think Bontorin could bread and butter his way to a win. And I know that's a weird way of saying it, but with Bontorin, he's kind of a more compact version of Brandon Royval. He's a better wrestler. I think he is the more physically strong guy. And this is where the fight is probably going to be dictated. If Bontorin is on top of Royval, I think he's going to be able to keep that position, do as much as he wants with that position as he can. If Royval's on top of Bontorin, I think he might struggle holding that position. Now, he's got great top pressure. He does have really good submissions, but where Royval exceeds is in those in-betweens. It's in the scrambles where, okay, we're both sort of half thinking about what we're going to do. That's when Royval knows, okay, I'm going for a neck. I think if Bontorin can keep higher hips, he should win this fight. I know that's a weird thing to say. But if it's on the feet, I do like Royval. I know he is really weird and wonky, but against someone like Bontorin, I do think that wonkiness is going to be a huge benefit. Now, against Pantoja, that doesn't work because someone who is so technical like Pantoja can get your reads down. They can play a much more steady game on the feet and just be defensively sound, where I think Bontorin's going to be more hittable on the feet. So I think this fight, oddly enough, is going to look similar to the Kakhramonov France one for both guys. It's going to be crazy. I think the pick is going to be Rogerio Bontorin, though, against my better judgment. Now, I will say this. If he does miss weight on Friday, I will switch my pick to Brandon Royval because I am that down the middle on this. But I think if we see the same fighter who went out there and fought Matt Schnell, who was able to fight on the inside in an intelligent manner to where I'm not too close to where every time we're getting close, we're clinching up, but I'm not so far away that I can't hit you with my strikes, I actually think this is a very winnable fight for Rogerio Bontorin.
Bontorin's beating a good striker in Raulian Paiva. Forget about the garbage of the Sean O'Malley fight, 135 and all that crap. But in that fight, Bontorin was able to win out in the striking. He's lost out in certain grappling exchanges, but he looked great in his last fight against Matt Schnell. Brandon Royval has not the best takedown defense, but he can work his submissions off his back and flip and, in a positional exchange, I guess is what I'm looking for. He is a way better striker than Rogerio Bontorin, who's been a negative striker in the UFC, and you see it in his fights. He can get behind
fast. He has big power because he does put a lot behind his shots, but you are right. There is a drawback to that, and it's a sloppiness.
And so for that, I like Royval. I think this is going to be one of those fights that it gets into the second round, it gets into the third round. We are turning it into second gear, and he's going to pull way out ahead of Rogerio Bontorin. I like both of these guys' games, and I think it's going to be one of those fights where it's either all in or all out for either of them. But for me, I've got Brandon Royval in this one. You've got Rogerio Bontorin. This is our second pick for fight of the night. This is such a good fight. This and Joanderson Brito against Bill Algeo. If you're going to catch any fights that aren't the main event, set the PVR, tell your friends that Craig and Matt said Brandon Royval, Rogerio Bontorin's the fight, and they're going to go, who, what? What do they do? What are those guys? Are they on, like, the Living Channel? Like, what do they do?
They gotta score touchdowns? No.
No. We're here for MMA. We're here to have a good time. So let us know down below in the comments section who you have. A couple of big fights left on this card. And if anything is added or subtracted, subscribe because we will have the updates as they happen. Listen, you're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, as we always say. Let's get into it. UFC 244 was an intense card. The Rock was there to crown the BMF champion. Roberto Duran was there for the eventual winner, Jorge Masvidal, when he was taking on Nate Diaz. And on the prelims of UFC 244, you had a title eliminator at flyweight between Katlyn Chookagian and Jennifer Maia. Yes, you heard that right, a couple of years ago. And now we have the rematch, the long-awaited rematch, and both of these fighters have had title opportunities. Chookagian beats Maia by decision. She ends up in the opportunity against Shevchenko. She loses. Maia goes out there and fights Valentina Shevchenko. She also loses. She fared a little bit better, but in this fight, and in their first fight, Both fighters fought to their strengths, I guess I should say. Well, one of them did. For Katlyn Chookagian, she wins the fight. The 29-28s are abound. I had a 30-27 Chookagian, but it was a lot of striking off the back foot. It was a lot of range. It was a lot of popping the jab out there. And for Jennifer Maia, it was that high tie stance that you know and love, but she wasn't really able to crash the distance and do a lot with it. She wasn't able to work in her very good jiu-jitsu and wrestling that we've seen in her fights, especially, you saw it against Shevchenko, but we've seen it in the past, especially when she was a champion over with Invicta. So now we have this rematch here where, if you look at the 5-on-in for both these fighters, Maia loses to Chookagian, beats Joanne Wood, loses to Shevchenko, beats Jessica Ai. For Chookagian, she had that fight 6 fights ago against Maia, so there's been a lot more fights, loses to Shevchenko, beats a Shevchenko and Antonina, loses to Andrade, the old body shot, beats Cynthia Calvillo, and beats Viviane Araújo. So it is a really tricky one because, again, you don't want to look back at a fight and go, oh, well, the rematch is just going to go the same way. But it's a weird one. It really is.
It is, because both fighters haven't made, like, crazy adjustments since their original fight. I know a lot of the times, for instance, Conor McGregor, Dustin Poirier, 1-2. Not really as much 2-3 because you realize what versions we were getting after the second fight. But so much time had passed in between their first and second fight, and they had just done so much throughout their careers that you realized, okay, it's going to be different this time around. We have different versions of the same fighters. I don't really think we're getting that this time around, if I'm being completely honest. And I know we like to come on here and try to add new wrinkles and say what we think is going to be different, but I don't see many worlds where this fight results in anything other than Katlyn Chookagian effectively striking off of her back foot and Jennifer Maia just having a really, really hard time closing that distance. Because for Maia, I know a lot of people like to bring up, oh, she has good Muay Thai. It's not great. And
there's just not a lot of volume.
Exactly. And she's not great at cutting off the cage either. I think that's a really big issue with her game, because if she was able to corner her opponent a little bit more, I think she would at least feel more comfortable unloading with her strikes. But you're right. She looks like a natural Muay Thai fighter, just like a silhouette of her, but she doesn't really put it into practice all that well. And when you do talk about her grappling, it's phenomenal. Like, if she gets one takedown on Katlyn Chookagian, she's at least going to win the round. A submission might be a little much because Chookagian does have very underrated grappling in her own right, but Maia has at least the grappling to ride out the rest of the round on top, get ground and pound, threaten with submissions, at least do enough effective grappling to definitely win that round. So I like Maia in that aspect, but even go back to the Valentina Shevchenko fight, and I know I harped on this for a while. Maia got a takedown because Valentina tripped. Now, was she really good in the top position? You're the one who brought this up, not me. She got it because she tripped, and then she was really good in that top position. I just don't think Maia has the wrestling to get a lot of fighters to the mat and then employ her best skill. And she's not like Brian Ortega, to where Brian Ortega has amazing stand-up and amazing jiu-jitsu. So it kind of makes you choose how you want to get beat. Like, that's the best version of Brian Ortega. I hurt you bad enough to where you shoot on me, then I submit you. For Jennifer Maia, her game isn't really set up that way. It's, I'm gonna heavily volume strike with you, at least try to, and then if I can't, just try to move forward and shoot some panic takedowns. Like, if Maia had, I don't know, 20% better wrestling, then I'd like her a lot more in this matchup to at least secure enough takedowns to ride out time on top. I just don't think we're going to see Maia in a lot of her best positions this fight.
For Chookagian, it hasn't been great takedown defense over the entire UFC run, and if I can pick out who's taken her down, Lauren Murphy took her down, Liz Carmouche took her down, who else? Mara Romero Barella took her down, Alexis Davis took her down, Joanne Wood took her down, Jennifer Maia took her down, and so on and so forth. Andrade took her down, Calvillo took her down, and so did Araújo. But yeah, she won the majority of those fights. So that really is a tricky thing. And again, Chookagian throws so much volume to where Maia, she really just has to be like, I don't know, honey and coffee? I don't know. Like not you gotta be like well glue on paper? I don't know. But you have to be really, really there in the pocket, crashing distance, and not giving Chookagian the benefit of that reach advantage that she brings into every fight. So the odds for this one, Chookagian a -173 favorite right now. Araújo plus 145 or thereabouts. Tapology votes for this one, 1,481 total votes, 82% Chookagian, 91% by decision. For the 18% that I'm Maia, 68% by decision. I think Chookagian's going to win again in the rematch. I just have a really hard time seeing Maia implementing that powerful Maia game that's out there against Chikadze again.
So I guess I'll give mine. I'll pass it off to you because this is spur of the moment. What wrinkle do you think Maia could add to make this fight different? Because if I was in Maia's corner, I would at least try to get her to clinch a little bit more. Because at least those are those times in the fight where, okay, I'm not on the receiving end of the strikes, and at least it's somewhat of a 50-50 to where I can work in my wrestling. But again, it just constantly brings me back to the first point. Have either one of these fighters evolved that much since their first fight? I don't believe so.
Chikadze showed the good offensive wrestling against Shevchenko, which we've seen time and again. That's a big flaw. I mean, look at it against Andrea Lee or Casey O'Neill. But Chikadze did a great job in that one. But other than that, it's been pretty much the same thing. So I have a hard time really seeing any giant leaps or adds or anything that I can add to this one since their first fight at UFC 244. So both of us going with the American in this one, Katlyn Chookagian to get the win. If you have Jennifer Maia, you let us know down below in the comments section. And if you have Chookagian too, you let us know. Big time fight in our main event. Calvin Kattar taking on Giga Chikadze. You're not going to want to miss. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. As we always say, let's get into it. Absolute banger coming up this weekend in our main event. It is the Boston finisher Calvin Kattar representing the New England Cartel taking on Georgia's Giga Chikadze. You know him as the Ninja, a guy who coming into the UFC fought some of the worst competition we've ever seen, and then he absolutely flips the script. He has a fight on Contender Series against Austin Springer, and in that fight, does he win that fight? No, he does not. He decided to grapple a little bit too much, but what will impress you is the fact that that one was back in 2018. He beats CJ Baines, who's 2-31. He beats, who else? Damian Manzanares, who's 0-1. And then it's Brandon Davis, Jamal Emmers, Erwin Rivera, Omar Morales. We're talking Jamie Simmons, Cub Swanson, and his last time out against Edson Barboza in his first main event with UFC. He looked absolutely amazing. And for Giga, you're taking on, I'm not going to say a carbon copy, but a very, very polished striker and a guy like Edson Barboza who's been at the top of the mountain, who's challenged some of the best guys out there, like Khabib Nurmagomedov or Eagles FC's own Kevin Lee. It was such an interesting fight to where Giga really showed up and made himself a star in that performance and ultimately made himself into a pretty hefty favorite coming up this weekend against Calvin Kattar, who's probably looking at this one like, y'all must have forgot.
Giga Chikadze beat Edson Barboza like he owed him money. Like, there was some viciousness behind those strikes. And it was a fight that, I'll be honest, I kind of counted Chikadze out in because Edson was established. He's at the top of the division, widely known as one of the best pure strikers, not even in the lighter weight classes, just across MMA. I won't even just restrict him to the UFC. That's how good Edson is. But Giga was so smart in that fight, and that's the first thing I'm going to talk about. Giga Chikadze didn't beat Edson Barboza because he's a better striker than him. Yes, he did. Don't get me wrong. He is a better striker than him. But Giga showed that he is a very cerebral fighter in that. And it was odd because I didn't give him that credit, at least early on in his UFC career, because I looked at that as more inactivity and less as him downloading his opponent. But now I think we have a better understanding as to what Giga Chikadze's overall game is. This is something I've been talking about a lot with like Joanne Wood. I'm surprised you agreed with me on it as much as you did, but some fighters don't really have game plans that are built to finishing fights, or really that have great synergy with themselves. Giga, I thought, was one of those fighters to where nothing he really does works together, although his talent is extreme. But now I can see, okay, he kind of has a bit of a Piotr Jan game plan to him, where yes, he's had a few early stoppages, especially as of late, but when Giga Chikadze is at his best, it's I'm throwing out prodding shots early on, I'm going to stay that long-range technical striker, I'm going to be very defensively sound, and then the second I notice a chink in your armor, I'm going to go after it and I'm going to exploit your weaknesses. It's just such a great thing to see out of Giga Chikadze because there's so many fighters in the UFC where we point at one thing that they do really, really well, and then there's all these negatives that sort of prevent that one positive from shining through. Chikadze hasn't let his few negatives overpower the immense positives in his game. But this is the thing, and I said this for an earlier fight, and I feel like it's the same thing. Nobody's giving Calvin Kattar any credit this weekend, and I'm very surprised about that. And I understand he's coming off of not a great performance against Max Holloway, but I think we do a pretty good job at this. You can't just look at the wins and losses on a guy's record and just judge them by that. You have to dive a little bit further. And the one thing that Calvin Kattar is far better at Giga Chikadze at is counter-striking. If Calvin Kattar catches Giga on the way in with one of those overhand rights or right straights, he's going to put him out. And I'm confident in saying that. Like, I know people are going to be down there, oh, but he's been hit clean before. Not really. Like, that's the only question mark about Giga Chikadze is, if he gets hit clean by Calvin Kattar, what's it going to look like? Because that's sort of the give and take about being such a cerebral fighter and about being a fighter who doesn't take a lot of punishment. We don't really know what you look like when you are forced to panic. Now, I used to roll your eyes a lot because I would say this about Cyril Gahn all the time, but Cyril Gahn finally had a fight against Alexander Volkov where he faced some adversity. Yes, he won that fight and he looked very good, but it was finally a fight that I could look at and say, okay, he got hit clean, he had moments not go his way, but he fought through them and he looked better as the fight goes on. That's all I can really ask for in a guy's progression or a girl's progression throughout the sport, and that's what we've seen out of Chikadze. But I don't think we can count Calvin Kattar out, because with his counter boxing, he's got some of the best pull twos in the game. When he counters your straight shots or your hooks and comes back with a straight of his own, if he can hit Max Holloway clean doing that in the 5th round of a fight where he's absorbed 500 strikes, I think he can do it to Giga Chikadze at least at some point throughout their fight.
And that's the craziest thing when you look at this fight and you look at the numbers. And listen, we used to go heavy into the numbers, now we don't totally.
I've always been against them.
When you do look into it, I mean, for Calvin Kattar in the UFC, the way higher level of competition. I mean, that's notwithstanding with Edson Barboza. You go through it. Kattar comes into the UFC off of a good run with CS. And oh, by the way, he owns Combat Zone, which is in New Hampshire, another MMA promotion. But you look at it, he debuts at UFC 214 against Andre Fili.
That's big.
Then he knocks out Shane Burgos at home, UFC 220 with me in the nosebleeds. He loses to Moicano, UFC 223. Beats Chris Fishgold in Moncton, New Brunswick, Canada. I asked him about the bird. Then he beats Ricardo Lamas, loses to Zabit, but he was coming back in that main event. Beats Jeremy Stevens, beats Dan Ige in a main event, loses to Max Holloway. All of this, much higher level of competition. For Giga Chikadze, you got to remember, his third to last fight, it was on short notice. It wasn't originally supposed to be him, but it was against Jamie Simmons. And don't get me wrong, I like Jamie Simmons as a fighter, so on and so forth. He gets submitted by Johnny Munoz Jr. Johnny Munoz Jr. is nowhere near a ranked fighter right now in the UFC. So
bad, though.
You can poke holes like Swiss cheese through the record, but I'm here to tell you again, Giga fought terrible competition outside of the UFC. Paltry. Like some of the worst I've ever seen in my life. It'd be like fighting Jay Ellis every night. Sometimes you're going to beat Gerald Mearshart. Sometimes you're going to lose the guys that are 4-0. But for Giga, it was bad competition. But in the UFC, Calvin Kattar's strike rate is insane, but his strikes absorbed per minute is bad, and that Max Holloway fight accentuates that. That's why, again, when you look at the numbers, if you're one of those guys that's just hammering away at the keyboard, well, I'm here to tell you this, Calvin Kattar's strike rate's a -3. It is, but you got to factor in certain fights before you go out there and fight that fight. So when I look at that, again, Kattar is one of the best fighters at keeping his defensive hips, at keeping guys off of him, staying off of the mat. One of the best all time that we've ever seen at featherweight. And to pop back up to his feet, he barely ever spends any time off his back. You can back that one up by stats if you don't have that argument on the interwebs. Giga Chikadze, the only knock I ever had on him was in the Austin Springer fight. Yeah, he had 2 submission wins outside of the UFC or on his way up. And then he fights Springer, who's not great. He ended up in the UFC, but he hasn't been great. But in that fight, Giga was like, yeah, I'm going to go down, and then I'm going to try and grab an omoplata, and then we're going to try and move into another position. It just didn't work out for him. But since then, he's been on absolute fire. Only 2 split decision wins. What was it? The Brandon Davis fight, and then Jamal Emmers in the UFC. Those 2 were by split. And then 2020 into 2021, it's absolutely wild stuff. 4 wins in 2020, and then 3 big wins last year. Main event against Edson Barboza. A great win against Cub Swanson that ages like fine wine based off what Cub looked like in his last fight against Darren Elkins. So, we said from the start, everybody's counting out Calvin Kattar. He is a plus 195 underdog. It was really hard to find odds on this one, truth be told, which is weird, but Best Fight Odds doesn't have them. Certain other sites don't have them. Chikadze's around a minus 250, and if we look over on Tapology, the votes are not close at all. 1,578 total votes, 83% Chikadze, 17% Kattar. If we head on over to the Fight Night Picks YouTube channel, we threw it out there, Matt, in the community tab, as we tend to do. So this is your chance to shine. 79% of the fans have Chikadze. You have 21% that have Kattar. And Matt, over in the comments section, JK says, honestly, I kind of want Kattar to win just so that Korean Zombie has a chance of getting a title shot.
At least he's honest.
That's fine. Drew is saying Kattar is a beast, but I just don't think he can match Giga on the feet, nor will he be able to take him down. Which, yeah, I mean, Kattar doesn't really take anybody down. And then Voodoo's saying, dang, I thought the card was today, but it's next weekend, so that's good. And so on and so forth. Who else? Tyler is saying Giga with the praying hands emoji. So, Matt, just about everybody's taking Giga Chikadze in this one. Calvin Kattar, some of the best, most crisp boxing you're going to find at 145. Does he have a big propensity of throwing the leg kick or checking it?
He can check them, but not really. Like, he'll get lazy with it. Sometimes he will, but you're right. It's not a big strength of his game. This is my problem, and I'm going to bring up another big-time athlete who's taking a lot of time off, and he's coming back tomorrow. Klay Thompson. Klay Thompson's one of the best athletes in the world. That's not an arguable fact. He makes hundreds of millions of dollars to play basketball. He is a world-class athlete. He's coming back in a sport that allows you to ease yourself back, though, because they have a very, very long season. He is an all-star, but even his coaches come out and said, we're only going to play about 15, 20 minutes, we're going to ease him back into it, and we're going to let Klay slowly become Klay again. Calvin Kattar's coming off a very long time off.
Almost a year.
Almost a year. He had a very bad loss his last time out, had some injuries. I just don't think this is them easing him back in. Like, if Calvin Kattar got even like a prelim main event on like a pay-per-view, I feel like that'd be the perfect position for him right now, because you need him to have that sort of one fight back to get back on the horse, because this is the problem with Calvin Kattar. He seems to beat a lot of guys in that 7 to 10 range, and then they want to give him number 3 in the world. And it's like, okay, build yourself up a little bit better, because all of his losses are to those top guys. I guess not Moicano at the time, you get it. Zabit and Max Holloway were a step too far. He seems to build himself up to like the 5th ranked fighter, and then it's always a step too far to get past that. If it was him coming off the Danige win, and if it was Giga just coming off the Barbosa win, and everything was normal, I'd have a really hard time with this prediction. But with this fight being set up the way it is, and with Giga Chikadze being so hot right now, I think he's going to be able to get the win. I really do.
Hansel. He's so hot right now. Yeah, I mean, you look at it, I think a fight for Kattar that would have made sense is a guy that I only ever see on Twitter having a good time with his pops. It's Arnold Allen. Great last name.
That'd be a great fight, too.
But yeah, I mean, this is just a really tricky one. And the thing for Kattar is you look at it above him. So who is there? Korean Zombie, who might be challenging for the title. That's what Volkanovski wants. There's Brian Ortega, there's Max Holloway, and there's Yair Rodriguez. And that's it.
Those are scary men, Craig.
So it really is tough. It doesn't get any easier. Never really does in any other division, but it doesn't at featherweight because it's one of the most dynamic. And for Giga, not just the Giga kick, but again, the prodding shots in the first round, to set it up in the second round, to get into the third round. The team at Kings MMA set him up so well for success. I'm going with Giga Chikadze in this fight for sure.
I agree with you, but this will be the interesting thing. So he got past the Edson Barbosa skill test, I guess. If he gets past Kattar, do you think
Rodriguez, make it happen.
Exactly. Do you think they just keep on going striker, or eventually will he have to fight a wrestler before he fights Volkanovski? Because here's the problem. If he does it, we both know what Volkanovski's going to do. He's going to pick him up over his head, slam him down, fight him like Jeremy Kennedy. But maybe, because this is the problem with Giga. He's very one-dimensional. He does that one dimension extremely well, but I do worry about him when he is going to start fighting the more well-rounded guys at the top of this division, because his run to the top has been full of, not cans, but definitely guys who he's been better than, and older fighters kind of past their prime. Like, I thought Barbosa was going to beat him, but Barbosa's been in quite a few wars at this stage of his career, and Cub Swanson's not young by any stage, so I think if Giga gets this win, he'll finally get the respect he deserves, and he'll be looked at as, okay, maybe one more fight than title shot, and I think he'll be able to get it done. But I do think this will be a great fight. I don't see this being a quick knockout either way. I think this will go round 3, round 4, be like a really good back-and-forth fight.
Calvin Kattar coming off a really tricky loss and a long layoff against Max Holloway. For Giga Chikadze, wins over Jamie Simmons by knockout, Kevin Swanson by knockout, the man himself, Edson Barbosa. Let us know down below in the comments section who you have in this fight, because we have a big-time banger at 145. Both of us going with Georgia's Giga Chikadze, the Ninja, to get the win. Make sure you check out Question Mark Kicks on Saturday, 2 hours before the prelims. And a giant heads up, Muslim Salikov is supposed to be taking on Michel Pereira in the co-main event on this card. Salikov is out. I would assume Pereira is probably going to get another opponent, because from 15 fights a couple of days ago, there's only 11 slated right now as we are Saturday to get ready for this one. So make sure you subscribe so you know exactly when we release those new videos and updates, because we do it as soon as we possibly can with as much tape study and information that you know and love. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, and as we always say,
let's get into it.